They handed me a rock in the middle of the ocean and called it my kingdom. I was 17, standing on the marble where every prince before me had knelt to receive his land. My brothers had gotten cities, provinces, fields you could ride across for 3 days without leaving your own name. When the herald called mine, the whole court leaned in, because everyone already knew what was coming, and they wanted to watch my face do it. My father did not look at me when he spoke. He stood from the throne, all white beard and armor he had never lost a war in, and he pronounced it like scripture, that his 17th son would go and govern Bonareef and rule that land in person. He said the word govern like it was a gift, a reef, a bare stone 10 days south of anywhere, with no harbor, no trade, no reason for a ship to ever pass it twice. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, quiet, just for myself. Nobody was kidding. The laughter started before he even sat back down. My 11th brother, Marcus, the one who could kill a man across a courtyard and never spill his wine. He only chuckled and said the reef suited me, and the court took that as permission. They whistled. They clapped the slow, cruel way you clap for something that is already dead. Somewhere off to the side, my 9th sister, Sarah, tilted her head and asked in that dreamy voice of hers where Bonareef even was, because she genuinely did not know and had never once needed to. That was the part that landed, not the mockery, the not knowing. You can hate a person. Hating him means he mattered enough to cost you something. But my sister could not place the rock they were sending me to die on, and my father said it like a prayer, and every laughing face in that hall agreed on one thing without saying it out loud. I was not being punished. I was being taken out, cleanly, under the cover of ceremony, so a king undefeated in war never had to be seen murdering his own son. I did not beg. I had begged already, days before, in a smaller room, and it had gotten me nothing but the memory of my own voice cracking. So I stood there with my chin up and let them have the show, and I told myself the only revenge I had left was to not give them a good one. I bowed to the floor that wanted me gone, and I walked out of the only home I had ever been allowed to want. They put me in a boat the size of a coffin and pushed me off alone. The sailing ship that towed me south did not stay to see me land. It cut its line the moment the reef came into view, turned, and ran for home like the water near me was catching. So it was just me, a month of food, a fishing rod, 2 barrels, a coil of rope, and a pickaxe, rowing the last stretch by hand while the waves tried to break my little hull against the only rock in the world that had my name on it. That was where the joke turned on itself, a little. I was born with the weakest magic at court. Everyone knew it. My brothers pulled lightning and swordfire out of their God-given crests, and the best I had ever managed was a breeze you could barely feel on the back of your hand. They laughed at that too, for years, but a breeze is still wind, and wind on the right side of a sail is still a hand on the tiller. I braced. I aimed the boat at a narrow flat shelf between 2 teeth of stone, and I pushed my useless little gust into the hull at the exact second a wave lifted me. "Please," I said, to nobody, to the water. "Please." Yes, the keel scraped rock and held. I did not drown. My worthless training had bought me one thing my brothers never noticed it could. It had gotten me ashore alive on the rock built to make sure I wasn't. I tied the boat off, hauled my supplies up onto the stone, and looked at what I had been given. No trees, no beach, no soil. Just a huge gray fist of rock shoved up out of the sea, and one dark mouth in the side of it. A cave. The only shelter on the whole island. Night was coming, and the wind was already going cold. I picked up what I could carry, and I went inside. The cave already had tenants. Every one of them was dead. I did not understand what I was standing in until my eyes adjusted, and then I wished they hadn't. Bones, not a few. A floor of them. Human skulls and the long curved ribs of beasts and things I could not name. Monsters with too many joints. All of it jumbled together with rotted boxes and rusted tools, half buried in the pale drift. Everyone the reef had ever been given. Everyone who had come before me, carried out here under some other ceremony, some other king's clean smile, and left to end exactly like this. They had not been killed. That was the horror of it. There were no wounds on them. They had simply run out of food, of water, of reasons, and lain down in the dark and stopped. The rock did not need to do anything to a person out here. It just waited. I sat down against the cold wall, in the one corner that had the fewest bones in it, and for a long minute, I let myself feel the full size of it. This was the plan. This was always the plan. My father had not sent me somewhere hard. He had sent me somewhere finished, with the proof of it laid out on the floor so I would understand my odds the moment I walked in. and some stubborn, ugly little part of me refused. I started making lists instead of graves. Rainwater off the rock when it rained, fish off the shelf where I'd landed, clear a space to sleep that wasn't shoulder to shoulder with a stranger's skull. Small things, done in order, one after another, so my hands had somewhere to be that wasn't my own head. I needed a place to lie down. The floor was bone and rubble, but the back wall of the cave was solid stone, soft-looking, the crumbling kind. If I could chip out a shallow hollow, I could sleep off the floor, away from the dead. I dug the pickaxe out of my pack. It was heavier than it looked. I set my feet, picked a spot on the wall, and swung. A voice spoke inside my skull, calm as a clerk, and asked if I would like to begin mining. I froze with the pickaxe still buried in the wall. There was no one. I said, "Say that again," out loud, like an idiot, to a cave full of bones. And it did. It told me, without a mouth, that it was the advisory function of my crest, the Cave King crest, the worthless one, the joke my whole family had built a name for me out of. Nobody at court had ever handed a prince a pickaxe. Nobody had ever put me in a cave. For 17 years, my gift had sat silent, because I had never once been anywhere it could wake up. And my father, sending me to die underground, had walked me straight into the only room on earth where the trash in my blood was a god. I asked it what it did. It showed me. The dark went bright, not lamplight. Daylight, clean and total, like someone had rolled the roof off the cave. Dark vision, the voice called it, plain as weather. Then points of white light bloomed across the stone in front of me, dozens of them, each one marking exactly where to strike. I lined up on the nearest one and swung again, half expecting nothing. The rock came apart like wet clay. One swing sheared a slab 3 men wide out of the wall, and it fell soft. No dust cloud, no crack of collapse. The whole thing guided down safe, as if the mountain itself wanted to be helpful. The voice told me my mining skill had ranked up. Then it asked if I wanted to collect the loose stone, and when I said yes, the whole heap simply lifted and vanished. Into an inventory, it said, a weightless nowhere I could see as a neat little list in the corner of my mind. Over 160 stones, counted and stored, and I had not bent my back once. I laughed. It came out strange, one hard bark of a sound in a room full of the dead, and it was not a happy noise, but it was mine, and it was the first thing that had been mine in a long time. Then I stopped being careful, and I dug. I forgot the boat. I forgot the fishing rod, the rainwater, the graves, the plan. I drove down into the floor of that rock, and the crest sang me every soft spot, and the stone kept giving. 10 strides down, the inventory started filling with more than gravel, iron, copper, then a seam of gold, dull and heavy, and worth a fortune to anyone but a man alone on a rock with no one to sell it to. And then 2 things came up out of the dark that stopped my hands. The first was a cluster of clear stones the voice called crystals, and it told me, flatly, that each one would raise my magic, permanently. Me, the prince with the breeze for a gift. The second was smaller, dull, unremarkable, a little rounded pebble, the voice named a lifestone, and it said each one, spent, would add a single day to how long I lived. I sat down in the hole I was digging and turned that pebble over in my fingers. They had sent me here to run out of days. And the rock, the death rock, the finished rock, the one with everyone else's bones on the floor above me. The rock was handing me more of them, one at a time, for free, out of the dark. The place built to kill me was the richest ground I had ever stood on, and not one soul who had laughed in that throne room knew it. I put the stone somewhere safe, and I picked the pickaxe back up. By the time I remembered to be a person again, I was 30 strides beneath the cave, and I had enough crystals to change what I was. I stopped and made myself count what I had pulled up. Stones by the 1,000, iron, copper, a little silver, a coal seam, a chip of ruby, a sliver of sapphire, and crystals. 90 of them, clear and patient in my inventory list. The voice asked if I wanted to use them. I said do it, and it told me, without ceremony, that 90 crystals had been spent. I felt nothing. No rush, no glow, no heat under the skin. I stood there in the dark, almost disappointed, sure it had been a lie after all. One more thing this world dangled and then took back. So I tested it. I raised my hand and cast the only spell I had ever been able to cast. The low wind, the breeze, the pathetic little puff that had earned me years of laughter. The blast tore down the shaft like a living thing. It roared. It slammed the dust off every wall at once and blew the dark back and howled past my ears loud enough that I ducked from my own magic. The breeze that could barely stir a candle had just become a wall of moving air, and I had done nothing but swing a pickaxe in the one place my crest was awake. Every year, I had spent being told I was born weak. The rock had just answered it in one gust, and the answer was that I had never been weak. I had only ever been in the wrong room. I wanted more. Of course, I wanted more. I turned back to the wall, half laughing again, and I told the dark I would dig to the bottom of the world if that was where the rest of it was. And my next swing stopped in the air, because something at my feet had moved. A blue quivering thing sat in the rubble at my boots and looked up at me, and it was the first living face I had seen since they pushed my boat away. A slime, nothing more. A soft, wobbling handful of blue that had no eyes I could point to, and yet was, unmistakably, watching me. I went still, because everything I knew said a wild monster. This close was a fight, but it did not lunge. It circled my ankles instead, curious, jumping a little, following the light of me through the dark like it had been alone down here as long as I had. The voice offered, in its flat and helpful way, that the creature could be tamed, that all I had to do was name it. I almost said no. A prince taming a monster was a crime back home. One more line I wasn't supposed to cross. But home was 10 days of empty sea away, and the law didn't reach the bottom of a rock nobody would sail to, and I was so tired of the sound of my own voice being the only voice. "Nice to meet you," I said, and crouched down to its level. "I'll call you Sky." The voice told me the taming was done. The slime did not react to the name at all. No bow, no glow, no sign it understood a word. It just kept quivering there at my feet, close, unbothered, mine. And that was enough. It was absurd, and it was enough. The loneliness went down by a shade I could actually feel, and I would have taken a lot worse than a nameless blob to feel it. That was the night I stopped planning to die. I want to be honest about what I decided down there, because everything after grew out of it. I did not swear revenge. I did not picture sailing home to burn that throne room down, or standing over my father, or making Sarah finally learn where Bonareef was. Going back meant being their subject again, their embarrassment, their problem to manage, and I would rather owe them nothing at all. Let them keep their cities. I had a rock that made days out of the dark, and a small blue thing that liked my company, and for the first time in my life, the walls around me answered to me and no one else. So I made a smaller, stubborner promise instead. I would live here, on the ground they threw me away on. I would take in anything the sea and the stone sent me, refuse nothing that wanted to survive, and build a home that answered to itself. "Careful," I told Sky, when the loose rock started to shift above us. "Rocks are falling." It quivered and stayed. I lifted the pickaxe, and the two of us, the discarded prince and the tamed slime, in a cave full of everyone the reef had already beaten, went back to digging for a future that nobody up there knew I had. 3 days into my new kingdom, I had a bed made of slime and a hoard that would have made my father choke on his own crown. I lay with my head propped on Sky, who had learned to go soft and flat under me like a cushion, and I told the ceiling it felt good, and meant it. The pickaxe had been busy. Iron, copper, a little silver, coal enough to blacken a city, and more of the pale life stones I still counted twice, because I didn't quite believe them. My magic had turned strange too. The breeze that used to embarrass me now caught fish out of the surf and pulled up water by the barrel. A man mocked for sweaty hands, and weak static was throwing mid-level spells like they were nothing. I had tamed maybe 10 more slimes since Sky. None of them were Sky. They wandered, bumped walls, forgot what they were doing. Sky watched me the way a person watches you. That morning, it poked my cheek until I woke, then stretched a stub of itself toward the shaft that climbed to the surface, toward the sea. "You want me up there?" I said. "Fine, show me." It quivered and led. A boat had died on the rocks. Not a ship, a boat. Small and stove in, its hull opened up like a cracked shell. 3 bodies lay among the splinters where the water had left them. Goblins. One old and thin, leaf green, wrinkled to the bone. One built like a wall, taller than me, closer to an orc than the little green things in the stories. And one small, round, no bigger than a human child, curled where she'd fallen. I crouched by the big one first, because the big one worried me most, and found a pulse. All 3 breathing, all 3 bleeding somewhere. Once, this reef had been where the kingdom sent people to die. I had walked its cave full of everyone it had already beaten, so I did not stand there and weigh whether saving 3 strangers was wise. A man who was thrown away does not throw others back. I laid my hands over the worst of the wounds and called up recovery, white light spilling out easy as breath, closing what was torn. When they were stable, I carried the small one first, then the old one. Sky swelled up broad and hauled the big one like a sack. I set them down just inside the mouth where the light still reached, left a barrel of water and a heel of bread within reach of of their hands, and stood there a moment feeling almost foolish. They'd wake or they wouldn't. If they woke hungry, the food was there. Watch them, I told Sky, and it settled beside the small one like a dog at a hearth. Then I did the only thing that ever quieted me. I went back down and dug. The rock came apart the way it always did now, a whole small room of it gone in one swing, or tumbling into that inventory I still couldn't see the walls of. I was thinking about nothing, which was the point. Then 2 new things surfaced in the count. One was a stone that glowed on its own, a steady warm light that never guttered and never asked for fire. The other, the voice in my crest named for me, plain as a clerk reading a ledger, a stone that broke curses, any curse. The kind of thing kingdoms kept holy men and locked libraries to manage, and I'd just knocked it loose swinging at a wall. I turned it over in my palm, mildly impressed, and had no idea yet what it was for. Then, Sky came bouncing down the shaft faster than I'd ever seen it move, throwing itself against my leg, and I understood the guests were awake. I heard them before I saw them. 3 voices, arguing. The big one wanted to grab the food and run. The small one and the old one wanted to talk first, wanted to know whose bread they'd nearly eaten. Then I stepped into the light, and the big one had a short blade out and leveled at my chest before I'd said a word. "Who are you?" he demanded. And then, worse, "Why are you smiling like that?" I hadn't known I was smiling. I glanced down at Sky, who had gone flat and shiny the way it did, and caught my own face in it. God, weeks alone in the dark had done something. Wide eyes, a grin nailed on crooked, shoulders hunched like a thing that lived under a rock, which, to be fair, I was. I fixed my face, loosened it, stood up straight, tried to look like a person. "Sorry," I said, letting the smile go. "My mistake. You must be starving. The food's yours. Take it." He did not lower the blade, so I tore off a bite of the bread and ate it to prove it was safe. Then I flicked a hand at the surf and pulled 3 fish out of the water with a snap of lightning, laid them down as an offering. The old one's eyes went wide. The big one only gripped his knife tighter. A stranger who healed you in your sleep and pulled fish from the sea with his fingers was, if anything, more frightening, not less. The small one fell. She simply folded, mid-word, and the blade forgot about me at once. The big warrior was on his knees beside her, his voice cracking down the middle, calling her his princess, begging her to wake. The old one didn't beg. That was what frightened me. He knelt slow, and he was calm the way people are calm when they've already given up. Her time was spent, he said. She'd been born under a curse that ate her days, and lately, she'd been slipping away more often than not. He was gentle about it. He said maybe it was kinder now to let her rest and stop asking her to keep fighting a thing that could not be beaten. The warrior said she was the last of the royal line. He said it like it changed anything, and I stood there, the useless stone still warm in my hand, and realized I had been holding the answer this whole time and saying nothing. "Wait," I said. "Wait, if it's a curse, I might be able to fix it." The old one looked up at me with an expression I'd wear myself, later, more than once. The look of a man who has stopped letting himself hope, being asked to try again. I knelt and pressed the curse-breaking stone to her chest, and it did in a heartbeat what holy men and locked libraries could not. The dark thing rooted in her went out like a snuffed wick. I felt it leave her, but breaking the curse only stopped the bleeding of her days. It gave nothing back, and she had nothing left. So I gave her mine, the life stones I had been hoarding without a use, each one a single day, mined out of a rock that was supposed to be my grave. I poured them into her one after another and did not count, and only afterward learned it was 79. 79 days of somebody's life, pressed back into a stranger's chest on a shore full of bones. The color came back into her, the lines of pain around her eyes smoothed. Her breathing dropped into the long, slow rhythm of someone simply asleep. I had come to this reef to be taken from. I had turned a death rock into a vault, and it turned out the first thing worth a damn I ever did with it was give a single day away, and then 78 more, and feel every one of them leave and not miss a single one. Her eyes opened. She blinked up at the cave roof, confused, and touched her own chest where the pain had lived her whole life. "How?" she whispered. "I thought I'd died, and it doesn't hurt. Nothing hurts." Behind me, the old shaman made a sound I won't forget, and the big warrior who'd held a knife on me broke apart completely, weeping into his own hands. The warrior apologized about 11 times for the blade. I told him to stop. I'd have drawn on me too. Over the fish, they told me the rest. Their homeland burned, orcs pouring through it, the king and his children killed. Some hundreds of them had gotten out, built ships, gone looking for anywhere, a year adrift. Then the ships went down, and the sea sorted them until 3 washed up on my rock. Fair was fair, so I gave them mine. A prince of soulfire, I said, exiled to this reef, probably written down as dead by now. The old one studied me a long moment and said nothing, which I appreciated. When I told them the pale stones extended a life and that I pulled them out of the ground by the handful, the warrior went to his knees again and begged to be allowed to mine them for her. I said yes before he finished asking. It seemed to break something in him. How fast I said it. There was a condition, I told them, and watched them brace. Let me tame you. The word landed like a chain. I saw it land, and then I explained what it actually did. That taming passed a share of my mining gift into them, made the work theirs too. Not ownership, a gift wearing a hard word so they could take it without shame. All 3 agreed. The princess insisted she'd serve as well, over the warrior's objection. I gave them names to go with the new life. Roland for the warrior, Walter for the old shaman, and for her I tried Elena, and she cupped it like water. Goblins can't hold magic and can't see in the dark, so I lashed glowstones to poles and made them torches that would never burn down. Their faces in that steady light were something to see. Then I showed them the work. 1 swing, and a whole room's worth of stone was simply gone, and Roland let out a whoop that shook dust from the ceiling. Water tastes like wine after a day of this, he told me later, sweat-soaked and beaming, and I decided I liked him. I set the wandering slimes to hauling. Sky organized them, nudging the dumb ones into line, carrying the loose rock close enough that my crest swept it up on its own. The cave that had been a tomb 3 days ago rang now. Pick on stone, slime slapping the floor, an old goblin laughing that a body his age could still dig, a dead place, suddenly loud with people building a reason to stay. A few days on, I broke through a wall I shouldn't have and fell into a room that stopped me cold. The walls glowed the color of a late sky, and the floor was soil, actual earth, on an island that had none. Then the earth moved, and it was a spider the size of a horse, black and shaggy, a fistful of red eyes fixed on me. I am not proud of the noise I made. I hate spiders, but it didn't come for me. It backed up, spreading its legs over a knot of smaller shapes behind it. 13 of them, its young. It wasn't hunting, it was afraid, and shielding its children from the thing that had smashed into their home, which was me. The voice in my crest said, mildly, that I could tame it. So I made myself sit down. I made myself small and still, and talked nonsense to it the way you gentle a spooked animal. And after a long while, it reached out 1 enormous careful leg and touched my knee. All right, I said, throat dry. Comrades then, I'll call you Bram. I named all 13 children too, which took a while, and somewhere in the middle of it, the crest went bright and told me I'd reached level 2. Level 2 opened a workshop. I couldn't smelt iron yet, the voice was firm about that, but I could shape raw stone into blocks and pillars and marble, grind it to sand, make gravel, and reshape the cave itself as I dug. Flat floors, ramps, stairs. I widened the tunnel into a proper stair on my way up, so a horse-sized spider could climb it with dignity. Bram came up behind me into the settlement, and the goblins nearly came out of their skins. Roland shrieked and pointed, and admitted, once his heart restarted, that he truly could not stand spiders. It was Walter who steadied everyone. Cave spiders that size shouldn't exist, he said, turning thoughtful, and their silk was stronger than iron, and, he added carefully, their waste mixed with that silk-made soil rich enough to grow crops with no sun at all. Soil, on a rock that had never had a handful of it. The one thing this island could not make, walking up my new stairs on 8 legs. Elena was the one who broke the tension. She crouched, held out a grilled fish to the monster that had just terrified everyone, and asked if it was hungry. Bram took it in an instant, delighted, and 13 children swarmed her for theirs, and she laughed and ran to grill more. Sky climbed up and rode on the big spider's head, and the dumb slimes lined up to copy it. I called it a welcome party, and grilled fish until it got dark. Elena found me at the end of it, tired and salt-crusted, and pressed something soft into my hands. A towel woven from Bram's silk, after she'd already finished the fishing net. She offered to make bedding next, 15 years old, already given back over 5 years by the stones, and spending every one of them trying to be useful to the man who'd handed them over. She'd been born a burden that a curse was slowly collecting. I knew a little about being counted as a thing the world would be lighter without. I'm really glad you came, Elena. I told her. Just that. Her eyes filled. She turned away fast, said it was only something in her eye, said she'd go start dinner, and hurried off before I could see the rest of it. I stood in the mouth of a cave that had been full of other people's bones a week ago, and was full of voices now. A warrior, a shaman, a princess who owed me days and paid them back in towels, a spider family, a slime that watched me like a friend. None of them knew I'd been a prince, and none of them cared, and that was the closest thing to home I'd felt in my life. I turned the towel over in my hands, went back inside where the light was, and let myself believe, for one night, that this was the start of something and not just the end of being alone. Elena was on her knees in the dirt when she called me over, pointing at the ground like it had insulted her. The apple seeds we'd pressed in that morning had already broken the surface. 10 seconds, she said. I crouched, looked, and there they were. Green shoots, no taller than a fingernail, shivering in the wind off the water. The sunstones did that. I'd mined a heap of them, pale things that pushed a living thing to grow faster than it had any right to. If one seed could sprout in 10 seconds, I figured a handful could do more. I fed 11 stones into the soil and stepped back. The shoot became a sapling. The sapling became a tree, a full apple tree, trunk thick as my leg, branches already sagging with red fruit, all of it inside a single breath. Walter made a sound I had never heard an old goblin make. Roland just started to sweat. That's food, I said. It was the first thing that had ever grown on this rock that we could actually eat. I had 678 of the stones left, enough for 60 trees, more if I was careful. So I did the sensible thing and handed the whole farm to the 2 people who would actually know what to do with it. Elena would run it. Walter had old planting knowledge buried somewhere under all his lore. They took the job like I'd handed them a kingdom. Then I went back to the one thing that always settled me, and I dug. Deep in, the pickaxe turned up something white and round, and the voice in my crest called it a revival stone, a thing that could pull a life back out of death. Only one. I had never found another, and I doubted I would. I carried it up and set it at the cave mouth in plain sight, where anyone could reach it if the worst kind of day ever came. Then I went back to work and let myself forget it was there. "Boss!" Roland's voice coming down the shaft. Not the happy kind. A ship, out past the reef, riding low in the swell, and on its mast a black flag with an axe stitched across it. Roland's tribe, the same people the sea had already thrown at me half drowned once before. His child was on that ship. He was waving both arms and shouting like the wind might carry his name across the water. I should have felt only glad. Instead, I did the stupid thing I always do. I offered Roland my boat and a fistful of gems, and told him he and his people could take them and go rebuild somewhere green, somewhere that wasn't a rock full of other people's bones. He looked at me like I'd struck him. "We already gave you our lives, boss." His voice cracked on it. "Now we're going to make that lot swear to you too." I had spent my whole life being handed off, managed, quietly gotten rid of. I did not have a good answer, ready for someone who refused to leave me. My throat did something complicated. I think I said thank you. I am not certain it came out as a word. Then the sea stood up. A wave, taller than the ship itself, rolled under it and over it, and the mast with its axe flag went flat against the water. When the spray cleared, the ship was gone. Only the sea was left, and dark shapes struggling in it where the hull had been. Most of them couldn't swim. Roland said it, and his voice came apart on the words. Elena was already running for the boat, but I knew the boat before she reached it. Too slow, too small, too late by half. You know a thing like that in your gut a whole breath before your head admits it. So I reached for the crystals I'd been hoarding without a use. Thousands of them. More raw magic than I had ever held at one time. And I put every last one of it into a single word. Freeze. The sea went solid. Not a patch of it, a road. The water between the shore and the drowning stretched over and cracked into ice in one wave of cold that I felt in my teeth. A white path laid straight out across the swell. I ran onto it, slipped at once, and Bram caught me across his back and carried me the rest of the way, 8 legs sure on the ice, where my 2 feet were useless. The spiders fired silk. Long gray lines shot out low over the water, and the goblins thrashing in it caught hold and were dragged in, hand over hand, one after another. The ones too hurt or too sick to grab. Sky flattened himself out and became a boat, and 100 other slimes did the same behind him, and we pulled them across the ice to the sinking and hauled them up out of the cold. Nobody drowned. Not one soul. 203 goblins came off that ice and onto my dead rock, coughing seawater, breathing, alive. Roland found his child somewhere in the middle of the crowd and held on, and did not care who watched him do it. I went down the line with healing until the whole shore was just wet and loud and breathing, and the sea behind us was a sheet of white settling slowly back into waves. Somewhere in all of that, A stout old man with an enormous beard and not a stitch of clothing wandered through the crowd like he had always lived there, looked at me once, and went to eat a fish. Nobody knew him. Nobody had seen him come off the ice. And somewhere in the churn of 200 new arrivals, the revival stone went missing from the cave mouth, knocked into the sea, most likely, or pocketed by someone who never knew what they'd found. By the time I thought to look for it, it was long gone, and I never turned up another. It taught me to keep the things that mattered somewhere deeper than a ledge by the door. 200 more mouths meant 200 more beds. I spent the days after carving rooms out of the rock, shaping cots and low tables straight from the stone with the cave king's hand, until the dead cave I'd been exiled to had corridors and doorways, and something close to streets. The goblins strung spider silk into bedding and nets. Walter fought the old ship apart for its timber with tools that kept breaking. Elena found me mid-work and put a wooden cup into my hand. Grape juice from the farm, from a vine that hadn't existed a week before. I drank it standing in the rubble and let myself think a genuinely dangerous thought, that we might get a second year on this rock, that we might, if I was lucky, get a great many. The naked old man had a gift for standing exactly where busy people did not want him. He crossed his arms and stared at a goblin hammering out pickaxes until the poor fellow finally snapped and shoved a hammer into his hands. Help then, if you're going to loom over me like that. The old man rearranged the furnace bricks without asking anyone. Then he forged a pickaxe head in about the time it takes to sneeze. The goblin scoffed at the thing. Too thin, he said. It'll snap on the first swing. Make it again. I took it down into the mine to settle the argument. Lined up on the rock, swung once. The stone came apart like it had been waiting years for permission. Twice the rock per swing as my old iron head. Twice. I came back up and set copper and iron and silver and gold in front of the old man, just to see what he would do with it. He grinned at the pile, the way a starving man grins at a table. While I'd been gone, he had already built a small mountain of finished tools. We never got a name out of him. He did not say a single word, not one, the entire time I knew him. So the goblins named him for the only truly remarkable thing about him, which was that he wore nothing at all. Gus, they settled on. We eventually got a spider silk loincloth onto him. The name stuck regardless. Whoever he was, whatever he was, he had just become the second engine of the whole island. Days later, the pickaxe broke through into a chamber that had no business existing down there. White marble, smooth as a palace floor, an altar standing in the middle of it, with a single gold stone resting on top. The crest named it an ascension stone. It could evolve a monster, push a living thing up into a higher form, a stronger body, and a whole new span of life to go with it. A whole new span of life. I had been watching my count of life stones fall for weeks. The stones that were the only thing holding Elena's borrowed years open at all. She kept telling me she had enough. Her face when she said it was always too brave, and it put an ache under my ribs every single time. I closed my hand around the gold stone and went to find her. I told her what the stone did. I told her I would rather she took it than I hoarded it. Walter knew the old story, that goblins had climbed up into hobgoblins and leaf goblins by this same road long ago, in tales he had always thought were only tales. Elena didn't hesitate, but not for the reason I had braced for. She didn't want the longer life for its own sake. She wanted to be useful, to be able to use magic, to stand where I stood instead of always a step behind me. She closed both hands around the stone. The light took her. When it faded, she was not a small, round goblin princess anymore. She was a woman, tall, pale-skinned, dark hair falling all the way down her back, staring at her own two hands like they had been loaned to her by a stranger. The whole chamber went silent. Gus took one look at her, made a small strangled noise, and fainted flat onto the floor. Roland shouted a word that wasn't quite a word, and Elena laughed, and it was the exact same laugh it had always been, and that was how I knew, under everything new, it was still entirely her. She was up before me the next morning, fetching water, wrapped in spider silk cloth, moving carefully in the body that was still new to her. I asked whether she was really all right with what she'd done. She told me she had always hated the way she looked, that she had been the small, dark, cursed one in a family of beautiful sisters, mocked for a body she had never chosen, born already carrying the thing that was quietly eating her life, the last living scrap of her royal line, and the one every one of them had overlooked. She said she had wished, more than anything in the world, to be someone worth looking at. Then she said, the body and the life were both mine to begin with, so she was giving me everything she had. I did not know what to do with that. I have never once known what to do when a person tries to hand me their whole self, so I reached for the smallest true thing I could find. Just keep cooking for me, I told her. That's enough. That's more than enough. She cried a little, then she smiled. Then she went off to make breakfast like I'd granted her a title. Maybe, the way she carried it, I had. Walter came to me with a plan bigger than the island itself, to make more island. The sunstones would run dry one day, and the farm was already crowding its little plot. So I did a thing that a week earlier I would have laughed at. I ringed a stretch of open sea with dropped stone, a wall standing 3 meters above the water, and then I pulled the sea straight out of the middle of it, drained a square of ocean the size of a schoolyard, and packed it full of sand and soil. 10,000 square meters of new ground where there had been nothing but waves at breakfast. The goblin children ran shrieking onto land that had not existed an hour before, and for one clean breath, I let myself feel like a proper lord standing on a proper place. Then Gus went straight up into the sky. One moment he was down at the forge. The next, he was a shrinking dot in the beak of a black bird bigger than a grown man. And behind that first bird came the rest of them. The whole bright sky going dark and loud with wings. Killer birds. A whole migrating flock of them, human-sized and black-winged. And the green rock I had built out of a dead one was a beacon standing alone in a gray sea. Of course they came. Everything that lived found its way here now. The grateful and the hungry both. Everyone, back to the cave. But the children were out on the new land, too far off, and the birds were already folding their wings to dive. Roland didn't wait for a single order. He went in among them with an axe in each hand, roaring, cutting birds out of the air over the children's heads, a decoy made of muscle and noise and open throat. He took down more than 10 of them by himself, and he was laughing the whole way through it, streaked and grinning. I raised the golem first. I reached into the inventory, poured out raw stone, and stood up a thing 3 meters tall at the mouth of the cave, a wall with fists, and told it to let nothing pass. Then I turned to face the sky, and I gave it the winter blizzard. The air went white. The flock froze mid-wing, hundreds of them seizing solid in a cold that fell out of a clear sky, and they dropped. 80 of them hit the new ground as dead frozen weight, whole, still, glittering. The ones that lived broke apart and fled south over the water and did not turn back. Somewhere in the thick of it, a bird coughed Gus back up out of its throat, alive and slick and absolutely furious, and a slime slid in beneath him, so the old man landed soft. 80 birds turned out to be a very great deal of meat, rich and sweet, fat off their long ocean flights, and we built the fires high and ate until every last one of us was greasy and loud and warm. I froze one chamber of the cave solid to keep the rest of it. Nobody on that rock had ever eaten so well. Maybe nobody among them had eaten so well in their whole lives. Years on, they would still hold a festival on this exact day, and half of them wouldn't remember. It began with the sky trying to swallow them. Roland's daughter cornered me at the fire, Fiona, a young goblin who was all sharp elbows and open want, and demanded to know why I was stronger than her own father. Mining, I told her. Crystals dug out of the rock, nothing more. She could mine her own evolution stone if she wanted so badly to be a magic user. The road was open to anyone willing to swing for it. She had dragged poor Gus off toward the forge to hammer out a pickaxe before I'd even finished the sentence. And I gave Elena 800 crystals, pressed them into her hands, and closed her fingers over them, and told her to make her magic into something that could hold this place while I was down in the dark. She protested that it was far too much for someone like her. I told her there was no one like her, and I left before either of us had to sit in the middle of that. I went back down into the mine that night with a new pickaxe in my grip and a longer list of walls to build. The rock they had left me on to die had a farm now, a smith, 200 souls, a wall of new land, and its first real line of defense. Somebody was going to have to come and try to take all of it from us now. To my own surprise, I found I didn't mind the thought of making them try. Fiona's pickaxe went through the wall and into nothing, and the nothing turned out to be full of soldiers. They stood in rows in the dark, huge armored things, twice my height, silver gray and silent. Then the first one turned its head, and the whole rank breathed fire. I threw a barrier up before I finished the thought. The flame washed over us and broke on nothing, close enough that I felt the heat push against my teeth. Fiona screamed. I didn't. I'd stopped being surprised by this island a while back. Down, I told her, and hit them with storm. The wind took the front row off their feet and folded them into the far wall. Armor came apart like dropped crockery. I walked the spell down the chamber, one gust after another, until the last of them was scrap on the marble, and the only sound was Fiona's breathing and grit settling out of the air. They weren't alive. Not really. Dolls, golems, old ones, built by somebody long gone and left standing guard over a room they'd forgotten the point of. I cracked one open. A false heart sat in its chest, and beside Beside it, a stone the color of old honey. Fiona lunged for it. Sure, it was an evolution stone, the thing she dug for every waking hour. It wasn't. My advisor named it a magic stone, a thing that holds a spell the way a lamp holds oil. That was how the dead men had thrown fire. Fiona's face fell so hard I nearly laughed. A dozen golems, a dozen false hearts, and only whoever built them left to explain the why. Nobody was coming to explain. Then Gus was there. Nobody heard him come. He never carried a light, and he never wore much else. And one moment the chamber was ours, and the next, the naked old smith was standing in the wreck, with both arms around a sword as long as he was tall. He kissed the blade. He actually kissed it. Fiona made a noise I can only spell as horror. I went for the second sword, the one still lying whole, and I could not lift it, not budge it. I braced and hauled until my back complained, and the thing sat there like it had grown roots. My advisor, helpful as ever, informed me that at my rank, I could only collect what I mined. So I did the sensible thing and broke it with my pickaxe, and the inventory swallowed the pieces, and told me the set had come apart into 900 bars of mithril. Mithril, lighter than steel, the old stories said, and here it was too heavy for me to drag one length of it across a floor. Some trick of the ones who forged it, packed dense as a kept secret. Gus didn't care about the how. He had his sword, and he carried it out into the daylight like a man carrying his own child. Outside, the whole settlement was trying to lift Gus's sword. Bram got 4 legs under it and went over sideways. Then Roland shouldered through the crowd, announced that anything a naked old man could do, a general could do better, and hauled the blade over his head on a roar and the strength his great warrior crest lent him, for exactly as long as it took to lose his grip. The sword came down. So did Roland, headfirst, into the sand. I slowed the fall with a breath of wind and healed the lump before it could swell. Fiona got there before I finished, small fists already going, calling her father every kind of idiot with tears running down her face. The only family she had left had just dropped 100 kilos of metal on his own skull to show off. Roland took the scolding like a man who knew he'd earned all of it. Gus, meanwhile, had already melted the first sword down. By evening, he'd put a pickaxe of pure mithril in my hands, so light it felt like holding a stick, and it bit rock twice as fast as anything I owned. He made axes, knives, tools I hadn't asked for. Then I got greedy with the leftover metal and tried to raise a guard doll from it, the way I'd raised the stone golem. What stood up was not a lump of rock. It was a slim silver figure, smooth as something poured, light sliding off it the way it slides off water. Gus dropped flat on his face in front of it, pressed his forehead to the ground. Palms turned out, some old worship nobody living was supposed to remember. Then he looked at me like I'd done something holy and went back to his hammer without a word. He never used words. I'd stopped waiting for them. The sea started giving things back a few days later. Planks first, then a broken oar, a strip of scorched sail, a slick of coal-black splinters riding the tide onto our new land. Then the bodies. An orc came in face down with one arm gone and his armor split open. And after him, a thing with white fur and a wolf's long jaw. A kobold, Walter said, wolf-headed, enemy to orcs and to goblins both. Smoke stood on the far horizon like a smudged thumbprint. Somewhere out past our quiet little reef, 2 fleets had found each other, and the losers were washing up at my feet. We counted 24 before the day was out. Walter walked the whole line of them with his old shaman's murmur, sending each one off however his gods took them, orc and kobold alike. I let him. The dead don't keep old wars, only the living bother. We were picking through the wreck for anything useful when I heard something cry. Not the gulls. Something small and frightened, and it led me to a box. Gold-cornered, jewel-bright, the sort of thing you'd never set adrift unless setting it adrift was the last kindness you had left. It wouldn't open, locked, and not with any hinge. A spell held it shut, the kind meant to give only for the right blood or for power to match whoever sealed it. I put my magic against the lock, and it let go, and out of a nest of white cloth and untouched fruit came a ball of white fur that latched onto my chest and would not let go. A puppy, I thought, for about a breath. Then I saw the little jaw, the shape of the ears, a kobold, an infant, small enough to hold in 2 hands, shaking so hard I felt it in my own ribs. Elena knelt and took her from me and had her quiet inside a minute, humming something low, rocking on her heels. "I'm used to little ones," she said, as if that explained the whole of it. The pup fell asleep with a fist knotted in Elena's collar. We were calling her Lily before we'd decided to keep her, which is the same as deciding. The trouble started over the kobold dead. My goblins had lost a homeland once. Orcs burned it, and the kobolds had helped them do it. And now, here were those old enemies laid out on goblin-made land, and somebody decided a corpse could still be made to pay. A boot went up over one of them. Enough! I didn't shout it. I've found you rarely have to. The boot still didn't come down until Elena crossed the sand and put herself between the goblins and the dead, and asked them in a voice I wouldn't have argued with either what a man gains by kicking a body that can't feel it. They looked at the ground. They said out loud what had been done to their own king's body the day their home burned. Then they remembered they were only breathing because of this island, and that was the end of it. Walter prayed over the kobolds the same as he had the orcs. My people stood and let him. I thought that was the hard part behind us. I'm slow sometimes. I was underground when the mithril golem came down the shaft ringing its bell. A ship had come out of the smoke, battered, half sunk. 10 kobolds rowing a landing boat for our shore. 2 stood at the bow, Ashton, gray-furred and lean, and Hayden beside him, broader, nose lifted to the wind. Hayden's crest let him track a scent across open water, and the scent he'd chased here was his lost heirs. What he found waiting on the beach was a golem, a giant spider, and a general of the bramble goblins, the tribe that had been killing his people since before either of them was born. Ashton drew the wrong lesson from it. He decided the goblins had his prince, and that the prince was already dead, and he came off that boat with a curved sword and no plan to survive the day. Roland met him axe to blade. Bram caught the other one, Hayden, on 4 braced pickaxes and had him wrapped in silk before he could swing twice. The rest went down under fishing nets, and Elena's lightning dropped and pinned, and not one of them killed, because that was the order, and my people had learned to hold their hands even around throats they'd waited a lifetime to open. By the time I came up the shaft, it was finished. Ashton disarmed on his knees, offering Roland his neck. Roland didn't take it. He wanted to. I could see exactly how much he wanted to. He said no anyway. I walked out with Lily tucked inside my shirt. I'm the lord of this rock, I told him. Best to ask me before you die on it. Then I opened my collar and let them all see the little white head blinking up at the light. The change in Ashton's face is the kind of thing you could build a whole life around seeing once. The sword was forgotten. The dying was forgotten. He came off his knees and crossed the sand back onto his knees, and when he was close enough to be sure, he threw his head back and made a sound that wasn't a word in any tongue. Grief and joy fused into one long note, and every kobold in the netting answered it at once. The last of our line, he got out, shaking. The heir of the Tiber is alive. Fiona, at my shoulder, whispered a bewildered, "What is even happening?" And honestly, I didn't blame her. An hour before, these two had been trying to kill each other. Now, one of them was weeping into the sand over a baby I'd pulled out of a box. We cut them loose, and I got the whole of it sitting on the sand. Orcs had burned the kobolds out of their homeland, the same way orcs had burned my goblins out of theirs. Nobody in the circle missed the shape of that. The kobolds had fled to sea in 30 ships thrown together in a single night, and 100 pirate ships had come out of the dark to meet them. And by dawn, there was one boat left. Their queen had spent the last of her magic fighting, then sealed her only child in a box that only her equal could open, and put it on the water because the water was the one road left that her enemies couldn't follow. Hayden looked at me a long moment and said, quiet, that he'd been reading my magic since the boat, and that it ran deeper than his queen's by more than he wanted to say out loud. That I wore a man's skin, but the size of what sat under it wasn't a man's. I let that lie there. It wasn't the hour to argue it. Ashton asked me to raise the child. He offered the ship, the tribe, the two of them as slaves, the fur off their own backs, everything they had, which came to nothing, because the treasure meant to pay for it was on the seabed with the rest of their world. I looked at Roland when it came time to answer. He'd lost sons to these people. If anyone on that beach had earned the right to spit the word no, it was him. Elena spoke before I could. She stepped up beside me and told them plainly that the bramble goblins would follow whatever I decided, and that whatever the two tribes had been to each other, that was the continent's ledger, and we didn't keep the continent's books out here. Then Walter knelt. Then Roland knelt, jaw-locked, grief and all, and behind him, every goblin on the sand went down with him. So I said it out loud, so there'd be no mistaking it later. Nobody who wants to live here gets turned away. Nobody who wants to leave gets held. And anyone the sea washes up half drowned gets pulled out of it, because I was garbage somebody threw in the ocean once, and this rock kept me anyway. I looked at the kobolds, then at my goblins. Whatever you were to each other back there, you leave it at the water. On my rock, there are no old grudges. There's just who's still willing to live. Nobody argued. The kobolds wept. I went to find 100 starving strangers somewhere to sleep, because that is what welcoming people actually turns out to be, not a speech. Bedding. The next stretch was digging, which suited me fine. I opened the cave wider and hollowed out rooms for 100 more bodies to sleep in. Their queen came off the ship wrapped and quiet, and I gave her ground on the reclaimed land and stone over her. And Ashton and Hayden set the kobolds to learning the pickaxe so they could help carve the rest of the room their people needed. And then, at last, I did the thing I'd been putting off since my first night here. The floor of that cave had been paved with bones when I washed up. The leftovers of everyone this rock had killed before me. The welcome mat I'd laughed at because it was the only welcome I'd had in years. I'd been walking over them for the better part of a year. I stopped walking over them. I built them a tomb, every last skull of them, and I laid the seas dead down beside them. And Walter said the words. The rock had been a graveyard nobody tended. It wasn't that anymore. It was a place that buried its dead on purpose now. There was one thing left in my pocket I still didn't understand. A seed the size of a potato, dug out of the deep rock that my advisor had no name for. Walter did. An old story. A tree so vast its leaves fed every living thing, whose burning was supposed to have toppled whole nations off the map. I decided to plant it, the way I decide most things, which is to say, without thinking about it nearly as much as I should. I raised a fresh platform of stone at the island's back so it wouldn't wall off our view of the sea, worked at it until the light went gold, and then I asked Elena to help me raise something together. She went red to the ears before I got the seed out of my pocket. Then she saw what I actually meant, laughed at herself, and knelt down beside me in the dirt. I put the seed in the ground, and it sprouted before my hand was clear. No sunstone, no coaxing, a green shoot standing up out of bare soil like it had been waiting under my palm the whole time. Gus had drifted up out of nowhere to watch, the way he turned up wherever something new was happening. Elena set a sunstone against the root. The shoot became a sapling. The sapling became a tree. The tree kept going. It went past Gus's head, past mine, past the platform, wood groaning and roots cracking the new stone as it reached for a sky that was suddenly not far enough away. I grabbed Elena and yelled for the cave, and we ran. Gus didn't. Gus slipped, and the trunk took him, folded around him mid-fall, and carried him up into itself. And the last I saw of the old smith was his face sliding by in the bark, higher and higher, wearing a look of pure bliss. No scream, no hand thrown up for help. Rapture, like being swallowed whole by a tree, was the finest thing that had ever happened to him. I shouted his name once. The tree kept climbing. Then Elena had my arm and we were under stone, breathing hard, listening to a forest grow out of a rock that a year ago hadn't grown so much as moss. By morning, it stood over the whole island, a green giant with its head in the clouds, roots knotted through my new land, and one silent old man somewhere inside it. The rock they'd left me on to die had a world tree now. A thing that big and that green, standing alone in an empty sea, was going to put us on somebody's map. I knew it the way you know weather. Sooner or later, something out there would come to see who had grown it. Let them come. I was done being the kind of man who ran. Gus went up the tree before any of us understood the tree was still growing. One moment, he was patting the bark like a man admiring a horse. The next, the trunk shot up under him and carried him along, and he ended up stuck a good 2 floors off the ground, arms and legs splayed, mouth open, powder pouring down around him in a slow gold rain. "Gus!" I shouted, running. "Hold on, I'm coming for you." That was the last clear thought I had for a while. The powder smelled like every good thing at once, bread and cut grass, and the inside of a warm house I hadn't lived in for years. I breathed it in, and the fear went out of me like water out of a cracked jar. Elena reached me and grabbed my arm, and instead of pulling me back, she started to laugh, and then so did I. I told her I was happy. I told her I was happy just to be standing there with her, in that light, with the whole green world humming. She told me she loved me, loudly, without 1 ounce of the shyness she usually wore, and I said it right back, and we danced. On the churned dirt of a graveyard I'd turned into a garden. We danced like fools at a wedding. I want to be clear that the tree did that. I keep telling myself the tree did that. Roland came running to save his boss, got a lungful, and started telling the kobolds he loved them like brothers. Fiona spun in circles. Even the baby, Lily, popped her white head out of my shirt and swayed. It should have been a disaster. It nearly was. Walter saved us. The old shaman had the sense to tie a cloth over his face before he got close, and he took one look and started barking orders through it. He sent the mithril golem up the trunk, since golems don't breathe and the gold did nothing to it, and it peeled Gus loose and packed the hole in the bark with a cushion of spider silk. The moment the hole sealed, the rain stopped. The bark grew back over it while we watched, smooth as if nothing had ever opened there. The joy drained out slow. Then the embarrassment came in fast. Elena went the color of a sunset and apologized about 6 times for things she had every right to feel and no intention of having said out loud. I told her it was fine. It was the powder. We'd all breathed it. Nobody needed to speak of it again. She agreed so quickly it almost stung. Roland refused to meet a single kobold's eye for the rest of the day. I felt the pull though. Even after my head cleared, some part of me wanted to walk back to that sealed spot and breathe deep again. I didn't, but I understood, standing there, that a thing which could reach into a man and pull the truth up out of him by the roots was not a small thing. And when I finally tipped my head back and saw how big the tree truly was, higher than the tower I'd been sentenced under, its crown lost in cloud, its roots knuckled through my whole island, I stopped smiling. Something that green, standing alone in a dead gray sea, was a lantern in a dark window. And things in the dark come to lanterns. I just didn't think the first one would come on fire. Gus made us new pickaxes. Mithril heads on handles cut from world tree branches, so light they felt like holding nothing, and I could swing one for an hour and not feel it in my shoulder. Fiona swore up and down hers had magic in it. Maybe it did. Half the things on that island did by then. Then my trousers split, straight down the back, loud as a snapped board, in the middle of a crowded tunnel. I would like to say I handled it with the dignity of a lord. What I actually did was announce that I was suddenly very hungry and walked to the surface sideways like a crab, while sky flowed up into a blue wall behind me to spare what was left of my honor. Elena, bless her, offered to sew me a whole new set of clothes and turned so red doing it that I nearly went back down the mine to live with the spiders. Gus patted my shoulder like a brother in grief, then proudly showed off his own new kobold tanned trousers, which was the least helpful thing anyone did all week. I went back to digging to forget the whole thing. That was when the wall wept steam. A little hole opened under my pick, and hot water hissed out, white and rolling. Fiona jumped back, then leaned in, delighted. "A hot spring," she said. "Adrian, that's a hot spring." Roland stuck a finger in and hollered that it was a good one. I checked the water for poison out of habit, found none, and stood there in the steam grinning like an idiot. On a rock they'd left me to die on, I'd just dug up a bath. I asked Gus if he could get it up to the surface. He didn't answer. He never answered, but he went to the forge and came back with a mountain of hollow iron pipe, so heavy only the golems could lift it, and he built the whole thing in a day. When I came up that night, the whole settlement was gathered around a brass contraption shaped like a T, with a wheel and a handle, and Gus was bowing to it like a stage magician. He turned the wheel, he teased the handle, he drew it out until Roland threatened him. Then he pulled it, and hot water roared up out of the pipe and came down over everyone like warm rain. I have walked into a throne room to be sentenced. I have stood alone in a cave full of bones. I am telling you the sound of goblin and kobold children shrieking with joy under a fountain of hot water undid something in my chest I hadn't known was still knotted. There was a glitter in the water, tiny lights that floated up off our skin and winked out, and left you warm and light and healed. A scrape on my finger closed while I watched. It was the tree again, the same as the powder, but gentle, generous, asking nothing. Then somebody splashed me, and it was war. Everyone got in. Goblins, kobolds, slimes, swelling up fat with water to spray it back out. Even the cave spiders skittering through the puddles. I threw water magic at Gus. Gus threw a whole pipe's worth back. Nobody tired, nobody cared. And for 1 hour, the races that had been trying to kill each other a season ago were just wet people, laughing. I turned to find Elena soaked through and laughing, her black hair dripping, and I lost my train of thought entirely and stood there like a struck bell until she asked, worried, whether I had a fever. No, I managed. Face your clothes at me, all of you. And I dried the whole crowd with one long pull of wind, which was the most useful thing I did all night, and also cowardice. Later I understood what the water had really done. It hadn't only cleaned us, it had mixed us. You cannot stay strangers with someone you've had a water fight with. A few days on, Fiona hit a trap. She'd been digging like a woman possessed, hunting for an ascension stone, the kind that lets a monster remake its body to hold magic, the same kind Elena had used to become the woman she was now. I got a shield up and a golem over her the instant the ground flashed. and the little blast went nowhere. Under the char, she'd struck a locked chest. I picked the lock with magic and lifted the lid. 3 gold stones, ascension stones, all 3, and 1 clear crystal the shape of a tear. Fiona burst into tears on the spot. She'd worked while the other children played for a whole season, and there it finally was. Walter took 1 look at the crystal and went quiet. A substitute stone, he said. It could become any stone there was. Even, he added carefully, the stone that brings the dead back. I filed that away. I had a dead thing or two in my past I did not intend to test it on. Fiona pressed 2 of the ascension stones and the crystal into my hands and kept only 1 for herself. I told her to keep all 3. She told me she only needed the 1, that the rest were for everyone, and there was no arguing with her, so I stopped. We were walking back for lunch, her singing, when the mithril golem came sliding down the shaft on a slime board, ringing its bell. I'd felt it already, if I'm honest. A tremor, hours before, from the direction of the sea. Fiona had said it was just a golem's footsteps. It wasn't. Something out in the water was moving, something big enough to shake stone through a mile of rock. And now the bell was ringing, and the children were screaming a word I'd been half expecting since the tree first touched the clouds. Ship. There was a ship. It was 1 ship, and it was a wreck. A kingdom battleship the orcs had taken as a prize. Black sails, a skull flag, 2 of its 4 masts snapped off. No fleet behind it. Ashton knew it on sight. A Corvin pirate ship, he said, from a clan whose banner used to mean 100 sails, not 1. A small boat put out from it, and a single orc jumped ashore. And I'll admit I forgot to be afraid for a moment because I was too busy being confused. She was enormous, done up in a stolen admiral's coat and a great golden wig, her face painted white and pink, and all of it sliding off in the sweat. Camille, Ashton called her, the captain herself. She did not ask to land. She ordered it. Paraphrase her however you like, but the gist was that we would let her people ashore this instant, and she hadn't the time to say please. She kept glancing back at the water like it was about to open its mouth. Roland took offense at her outfit before he took offense at her tone and told her so. She told him she gave orders, not requests. Steel came out. I stepped in as Lord of the Rock and told her who I was, and that we could talk, and she tried to grab me instead, and then it was a fight. Camille quick and vicious with a thin blade and hidden darts, Roland a wall, Ashton a knife of speed between them, and my shields on my 2, so nobody who didn't have to fall would. Then the reinforcements came, and everything got worse. 20 ships, sails in rags, sliding across the water with no oars and no wind. Camille's crew cheered. 2,000 of their own, come to save them, they thought. Ashton went white. His far-seeing crest showed him what the rest of us couldn't yet. The sailors on those decks weren't alive. They were her own dead comrades, walking. 2 of them drove straight into Camille's wreck and split it in half between them. Arrows came off the dead ships into the living orcs, and Camille stood in the ruin of her whole world and started to laugh, high and cracking, telling herself it was a dream. The sea answered her. A pillar of water went up taller than the tree, white and roaring, and out of it rose the thing that had been shaking my island for days. Blue scales the size of doors, a body like a river standing on its tail, a mouth that could take a ship in sideways. Leviathan, the old word for the worst thing in the ocean, and it was real, and it was here. I didn't decide to fight it so much as I decided nobody else was going to. Into the caves, I shouted, and I didn't shout it twice. All of you, mine and hers. Now, I told Roland to take the shield golem and the stones and go, and I put the 2 ascension stones and the tear-shaped crystal in his hands and closed his fingers over them. If I don't come back, I said, use that. Bring me back. He didn't want to go. He went because I needed 1 person strong enough to drag the rest, and he was it. Elena screamed my name from the cave mouth. I heard it. I made myself not turn around. Then it was just me on the reclaimed land, and the ocean, and the legend rising out of it. I started with the dead. 8,000 crystals, everything I'd hoarded. My whole savings poured into 1 word, and I let the fire off across the water. The undead fleet went up all at once. 20 ships to ash and steam in a single breath, so the thing in the sea would have no help and no meal at my back, and so I'd have nothing behind me but stone. Then I turned to the Leviathan and threw everything I had at it, and learned in about 4 heartbeats that I had nothing. Fire slid off its scales like I'd thrown a warm word. Lightning skated away. Ice cracked and fell as rain. It slid back under and came up closer, and it opened that mouth and breathed a blue flame at me that I caught on a shield with both hands and every ounce of will I owned. 10 long seconds of it, my boots plowing furrows back through the dirt. The shield held. My magic didn't matter, and there it was. The joke of my whole life told back to me at the worst possible moment. The court had sentenced me to a mining crest, a worthless power, a cave digger's trick, not a warrior's gift. Everyone had agreed on that, including, for a long while, me. So I stopped casting and I started digging. When it charged with its jaws wide, I threw a fireball straight down its throat, and it drank that too, the light guttering out somewhere inside it. Fine, not fire then. Something that didn't need any magic at all to bite. I made a spear, not summoned. Made the way I made stone out of nothing every day of my life, except this time I capped it with a jagged edge of mithril, and I made it bigger than the beast's own head. And I drove it down the open red tunnel of its throat where no scale grew. It went in. The Leviathan bucked, and then I did the only thing I have ever truly been good at. I kept working. I made another spear and fired it after the first, then another, then another. Fast as breathing, a string of mithril-edged stone hammered down its gullet one behind the next, each one driving the last deeper, forcing the thing open from the inside where all that armor meant nothing. It thrashed. The water went dark. It tried to close its mouth and I filled its mouth. It tried to dive and I pinned it under its own weight of stone. The god of the sea died on the point of a miner's tool. It came down like a cliff falling. All that blue length crashed onto the land I'd hauled out of the water by hand, and the ground didn't shake so much as leap. It threw me up off the shore like a flung stone, sky and sea swapping places. And the last thing I managed was a fist of wind under myself to take the killing edge off the fall. They'd called my crest worthless. I'd just killed a legend with it. I was still laughing when I dropped. I didn't hit stone. I hit sky. The slime had flowed out flat and wide across the ground, and I came down into him like a boy into a snowdrift, sank, bounced, and rolled out onto the dirt hole. Good slime. Best slime. Then Elena was on me, and she was crying. She had Lily clutched in one arm and both of us in the other, and she was saying my name and something about how if anything had happened to me, and then she couldn't finish it and didn't and just held on. I am not a man who knows what to do with that. I put a hand on her wet hair and said I was sorry for scaring everyone, which was true and also useless. Behind her, Roland was swearing at himself for hiding in a cave while his boss fought a god, and I told him hiding was the whole point, that I'd needed exactly one person strong enough to keep the rest alive, and he'd done it. Gus was already up on the dead Leviathan, tapping its scales, pulling at its whiskers, in love. Walter came and stood by its head and asked very quietly whether it was truly the thing from the old stories. I told him it was. The old stories had just been a little short on how it smelled. Ashton and Hayden brought the survivors to me on their knees, a battered double handful of orcs, and Camille at the front of them, wig gone, paint streaked, done. She told me to get it over with and kill her. Her comrades were fish food, she said. She had no ship, no clan, nothing left to go back to. I told her I wasn't going to kill her. You'd have thought I'd struck her. Ashton spoke up before she could answer. He said his own people had every reason to hate these pirates, that the two clans had spilled each other's blood for years, but that when they'd thrown in with me, they'd agreed to leave the old grudges in the old water. Hayden put it plainer. The Corvin weren't the worst of the orcs, he said. They sank ships, but they'd pull a drowning man out of the sea. He'd known Camille to set a penniless sailor free rather than let him rot. So I made the same offer I'd made everyone who'd washed up on my rock. There's no room here for prisoners who sit and eat, I told her. But there's always room for hands that work. Stay, pull your weight. This is a home if you want one. Camille looked at me for a long moment. Then she snapped the spider silk off her wrists like wet thread, surged up, and declared to the whole shore that I was a true man of the sea, and tried to fold me into an embrace roughly the size of a barn door. Sky got there first, flattening into a wall she bounced off of. Ashton and Hayden grabbed an arm each, and could barely hold her, and the worst part was that she was enjoying it. She kept breaking loose. She got about 3 words into telling me she couldn't possibly hold herself back when Elena stepped up beside me, smiled a smile with no warmth in it at all, and said one word, sleep. Camille went down mid-lunge and started snoring in the sand. Elena kept smiling. I decided several things were safer left unexamined and moved on. We took the Leviathan apart over the next days, and it gave and gave, scales clear as glass, hide that stretched and wouldn't tear, bone as hard as forged iron, meat enough to fill a whole new cold store cut into the rock, and good enough that Gus ate it raw off the knife and waved the rest of us over. Camille kept her name. Corvin captains always do. She informed me at length the moment she woke, and her people stayed. Counting the ones Roland hauled out of the wreck, 140 orcs moved onto my island. Sailors, everyone. Folk who knew the open water the way I knew the dark under it. She'd lost 100 ships and 4,000 of her own to that monster in the deep. I couldn't give her those back. I could give her somewhere to stand. That night, the feast mixed every race the sea had ever thrown at me. Goblins and kobolds and orcs, and one flat blue slime, a dwarf who wouldn't speak, and a spider the size of a horse. All of them eating off the same fires under a tree that touched the clouds. I sat back with sky warm against my side and thought about the cave I'd first walked into, the one full of other people's bones. The quiet of it, how sure I'd been that alone was all I'd ever get. A kobold baby toddled over and tried to lift a pickaxe twice her size, failed, and reached for it again, furious about it. I laughed and scooped her up. Elena came and looked at the little scowling face and said she needed a name. We made one out of ours, hers and mine, folded together, Adriana. The baby laughed at it, which I chose to take as approval. Elena poured tea steeped from world tree leaves, and I drank it under the canopy with a full island at my back. And for the first time since a throne room a world away, I let myself think the word future without flinching. Somewhere past the reef, the open sea rolled on toward us, full of trade and full of trouble. Let it come. I had a navy now. 3 days after I killed a legend, I was sitting at a marble table under the world tree, arguing about job titles. The island had outgrown being a cave, 500 mouths and more, every color of monster the sea had ever spat at me, and no shape to hold them, so we made one. Walter took the law and the judging. Roland took the walls. Ashton and Hayden took the hunt and the peace between old enemies. Camille took the sea. Gus took the forge and never said a word about it, because Gus never said a word about anything. Elena took the kitchens and the cloth and the whole surface when I wasn't on it. Me, I gave myself the smallest title on the rock, Cave Minister, which mostly meant nobody could stop me going back down to dig. Then we spent the stones. We still had ascension stones out of the trapped chest the Leviathan died guarding, and one by one, my family used them to become more than they were. Fiona went first. She held the stone up, the light swallowed her whole, and when it cleared, a human girl was standing there with black hair and dark eyes. My hair, my eyes, because she'd wished only to be strong like me, and the stone took her at her word. I put my face in both hands. Roland made a noise like a kettle coming to the boil. Camille wished to fly and to trade, and she came out of the light, winged and radiant, and struck a pose so enormous I yelped out loud. She blew me a kiss and floated off to have a coat tailored. Walter spent his last, and the little wrinkled shaman became something gray-skinned and horned with folded bat wings, a mountain of quiet power wearing the same gentle old voice underneath. One stone we did not spend. Walter said it could be turned into a stone that brings the dead back, a life kept in reserve. Ashton wanted it for the queen he'd lost. Then he lowered his eyes and asked instead that we hold it, in case something ever happened to me. I put it in my pocket, insurance against a day I hoped never came. Elena set the teapot down at my elbow. I could build you a proper house, my lord, she said, up in the tree with a view of the water. I told her the cave suited me fine. She looked disappointed for a breath, then pleased, the way she always managed both at once. Then I went where I always went when the talking got loud, down. Lily could stand now. The kobold baby I'd pulled from a jewel box had a pickaxe the size of a feather pen, world tree wood, and mithril, and she swung it beside me, serious as a soldier. When I reached out and made her one of mine, something clicked in the dark. The cave God-Crest climbed to its third rank. White light bloomed on the walls wherever the good stone hid, and all at once, every tamed creature I had could see in the black. Lily blinked at a cave gone bright as noon and barked once, delighted with the whole world. Fiona dropped down after us, still learning her new human knees, and swore she'd outdig me by winter, so I'd have no choice but to like her. I told her to mind the ceiling. Behind my ribs, I was already thinking of someone else, so I dug faster and let the sound of it cover my face. We were deeper than anyone had ever gone when my pick struck gold. Not ore, a whole wall of it worked smooth. A door that was not a door. I broke through with a shield up and the mithril golem at my shoulder, and the wall gave onto a room that had no business existing under a dead rock. Golden shelves, barrels, pipes, and a strange table of handles and levers. A tall glass tank of purple liquid, tall enough to hold a man, and the whole place smelling of grapes and spotless, as if someone had dusted it yesterday. A wine cellar, buried, sealed, with no door in or out. Then Elena screamed. Gus was inside the tank, floating, mouth open, eyes rolled white. I hit the glass with both fists, shouting his name. Sure, I was watching my silent smith drown in front of me. And then his throat moved. He was swallowing. He'd climbed in himself, worked the ancient machine, filled the tank, and gone for a soak in the wine. He turned a slow circle and gave me a little ring of finger and thumb. Fine. Everything was fine. I nearly killed him where he floated. Elena found the answer to the door on a shelf. A dull blue stone, hexagonal, cloudy as old ice. My crest read it the moment I touched it. A stone that could carry you in a blink to its twin, however far apart the two sat. That was the secret of the doorless room. Whoever built this place had stepped between paired stones instead of walking through walls. I pocketed that too. Whoever they were, they'd left more down here than wine, and I was not ready yet to meet them. Gus's next trick caught us on the climb out. A cart on iron rails, pulled by a little smoking engine that turned a long trudge to the surface into one screaming minute of curves. Fiona loved it. Lily loved it. I threw a barrier up on the first bend with my stomach somewhere near the ceiling and my dinner close behind it. The day's haul rode up in the cart with us. 80 diamonds, each one fatter than the stone in my father's scepter. On the rock they had sent me to die on. I was pulling a king's ransom out of the dark every single day and using the leftover stones to prop cave doors open. I laughed about it, quietly, so no one would think I'd lost my mind. The days blurred, the good way. Then Lily stopped mid-swing, lifted her small black nose, and pointed at a blank stretch of wall. Nothing behind it my eyes could find, no magic at all. But I dug where she pointed, and I turned up a nest of tiny bird bones, and cradled in the middle of them one white egg, whole, smooth as a pearl, older than anything down there had any right to be, and not so much as cracked, just the one. She carried it everywhere after that, tucked against her belly like a treasure. Up on the surface, days on, it hatched. A small white bird dropped onto my shoulder out of nowhere and licked my cheek like it had known me its whole life. Ashton squinted and called it a pigeon. Hayden said he'd never seen a bird so purely white. Then it took a whole grilled fish off Lily and crunched it down, bones and all, which no pigeon does. And a quiet voice in my head asked if I wanted to tame the creature, and told me it carried more magic in its little body than a grown orc. I named her Mel. Walter watched her a long moment, folded his gray arms, and said gently that whatever climbs out of an egg, buried longer than the kingdom has stood, it is not a pigeon. I filed that away with all the other things this rock had not finished telling me. Roland raised a watchtower over the reclaimed land, and the children found a better use for it than watching. They'd hung spider silk lines from a metal frame at the very top, and they swung out from it in wide circles over the long drop. Goblin and kobold and orc children together, shrieking, spinning out over the water and back again. Roland cupped his hands and bellowed down for me to come up and try it. I did not move. When I was small, the court had a way of teaching me where I belonged. They would hang me from the top of a tower, higher than a mountain, it felt then, and leave me swinging there while the room laughed. A boy on a string for their amusement. I never told a soul about that. I had built a whole life 10 days sail from that court on purpose, and here it was again in front of me. A tower, a rope, and people asking me to dangle off it. But I watched the children a while longer. Nobody was laughing at them. They were laughing because the tower was theirs. So I let Roland strap me in. My hands were shaking and I hid them. I stepped off the edge before I could think better of it. And for one long, sick heartbeat, I was that boy again, strung up over nothing while the world laughed. Then the silk caught. It swung me out over the bright water, and my stomach dropped clean out of me, and the wind filled my ears. And no one was laughing at me. Lily was barking. Fiona was cheering from below. Elena stood with a hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes shining, watching to see me land safe, the way no one at that first tower had ever bothered to. Same tower, same rope. A whole world away from the first one. I came off it green and reeling and swore I'd never do it again, and it was one of the best things I have ever done. Some cruelties you outrun. This one, I got to swing right through and out the other side. I hadn't got my legs back under me when the mithril golem came down the slope ringing its bell. I felt the thing before I saw it. The whole sea gone heavy with magic, more than the Leviathan. A red line drawn along the horizon. Then the line came apart into pieces, and the pieces were crabs. Thousands of them, iron-shelled, big as hunting dogs, claws that could have a tree, marching up out of the surf onto my shore and throwing lightning as they came. Elena was already at the waterline. She had made herself into a soldier since the day I found her dying, and now she stood at the head of a rank of crossbows, Gus's crossbows, the only bolts on the island that could punch through those shells. And she threw up her hand, and the whole beach lit with her fire. Roland roared the archers into rhythm. Walter's lightning tore bright lanes straight through the swarm, and I did the one thing I am good for in a fight that isn't mine to swing. I fed it. I poured my magic into Elena until her fire ate the crabs in rows, and I threw shields over the ranks every time the sky came down white and cracking. We held the line. We turned the tide back into the water it had crawled from, and then we hauled the shells up onto the sand and stacked them, because they eat well and they make good armor. And I stood there in the smoke, doing a sum I did not like, the Leviathan. Now this. Twice the sea had thrown something monstrous at exactly this rock, and no other. Once is a legend, twice is a pattern. Something about my green and growing island was calling them in across all that empty water, and I did not yet know what. Two things I had never done, counted what I'd mined, or opened the door to the world. I did both in one afternoon on the dock. I emptied my inventory. Everything I had ever pulled out of the dark and never spent came out at once. Gold, silver, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, the diamonds by the day, and it came down in a roar and made a mountain on the planks, taller than me, sliding and spilling and catching the sun until the whole dock burned with it. For a moment, I just stood and stared like everyone else. I had swung the pick that pulled all of it. I still couldn't quite believe it was real, or mine, or that a boy sent to a bare rock to die had somehow dug up more than the palace that threw him away. The whole island came running. Roland forgot his own name. The children dove into it like it was a snowbank, and I let them. A pile that big could lose a few handfuls and never notice. Then we made the list of what a nation actually needs. Seeds, so we ate more than fish. Livestock for milk and wool. Books, how to read, how to build, how to farm. And near the top of the list, coin to buy back the kobolds and goblins the orc ports still sold in cages, and to offer every one of them a home here if they wanted it. The people I could free were worth more to me than any stone on that pile, and stone was the one thing I had to burn. Camille filled her sacks, boarded the mithril ship with 80 orcs and 3 months of stores, and swore she'd be back inside 2 weeks. She leaned over the rail, winged and grinning. "Have a reward ready for me, my lord." I told her I'd do anything within my power, which even as I said it, I suspected was a mistake. She laughed, and the wind took her sail, and my island opened its door to the world for the first time, on my terms, in my ship, carrying my gold. Watching that sail shrink, I felt the good of it and the cold of it at the same moment. A ship that trades has to trade with someone, and someone, somewhere across that water, was going to hear exactly where all that gold had come from. They heard sooner than I would have liked. 10 days sail away, in a throne room, a whole world from mine. The talk over the wine had turned to a strange thing off the trade routes. A dead reef, the bone rock where the kingdom sent men to die, had begun sending ships. Ships riding low with diamonds and rare purple dye, crewed by monsters, spending coin like an empire that had always been there. One of the princes at that table, wine in hand, remembered which useless son had once been handed that exact rock to die on. The king said very little, but the rumor had a hook in it now, and slowly, quietly, it was being drawn back toward a throne. I knew none of that yet. I was standing on my own dock, watching a sail go small against the sky, thinking the word future, and, underneath it, one quieter word I couldn't quite name. Whatever was coming, let it come. I had built this rock into a home once, out of bones and salt and strangers. I could do it again if I had to. The morning the trade ship sailed, I went straight down to the bottom of the mine and started digging like the sea, and the whole outside world didn't exist. I had a nation up top now, ministers and rails and a treasure the size of a hill, and the only place my head ever went quiet was down here with a pickaxe in my hands. Besides, the rock still owed me answers. A doorless winery kept spotless, a blink stone that carried you between 2 paired points. Somebody had built all that and then vanished, and I wanted to know where they'd gone. Lily rode my shoulder and chipped at the wall with a pickaxe the size of a pen. Mel dug beside her, cracking loose stone in her beak. Sky quivered at my feet, keeping count of the rubble the way she always did. Then the floor moved, not a tremble. A long, deep shudder, like something enormous rolling over in its sleep. Dust sifted from the reinforced pillars. Lily froze, ears flat. I got everyone behind me and threw up a shield out of habit, and I had just enough time to think about the whole ceiling coming down before the shaking stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence. Then Lily tugged my trousers and pointed. There was a thing growing out of the wall, a red, fleshy petal shape with a hollow center, and it was breathing. It flexed, wet and slow, and every instinct I owned said, leave it alone. Lily swung her little pickaxe at it before I could open my mouth. The wall crumbled, the petal snapped wide, and a wall of water roared out and slammed into my shield hard enough to skid me backward across the stone. A voice came out of the hole, deep, rattling, and very put out. I looked up and realized the fleshy flower wasn't a flower at all. It was a mouth. Above it, a red eye the size of a dinner plate blinked at me out of the dark, and the two of us screamed at exactly the same time. When we stopped screaming, we started talking. It was a giant brown lizard, scaled like armor, with that flower for a jaw, and it had been wedged in the rock trying to dig into my cave. My cave king crest let no one dig these walls but me and mine, so the poor thing had gotten its face stuck and gone nowhere. I couldn't chew through, the lizard grumbled, working its jaw. Solid rock. Never met rock that won't move for me. That would be my fault, I told him. It's my cave. His name was Lloyd, and he was a merchant. An earth dragon, he said, from a continent called Eldon on the far side of the world, a place no kingdom on our maps had ever heard of. He'd been traveling underground for a month and was only halfway home, and when he sensed the size of my magic, he stopped grumbling and got a very businesslike gleam in his eye. I could have left him in the wall. Instead, I dug him out, sat him down, and fed him. He ate an entire roasted killer bird and a boiled crab in 4 bites, drank half a barrel of wine, and hauled out his wares. Cups and blades and art, all cut from dragon scale, clear and hard as glass. And eggs, a whole clutch of them, warm and speckled, wyverns for flying mounts, and one big fire dragon egg that he tossed me like a bonus melon. We traded world tree branches and fruit for the lot. He swore he'd be back with more, and lumbered off down a tunnel I hadn't dug, hauling a bag taller than a man. Just like that, Bonareef had a road to the other side of the world. The next find, we walked into by accident. Fiona had challenged me and Bram to a digging contest, deepest tunnel by noon winds, and I take those seriously. We tore straight down. 5 minutes in, all 3 of our pickaxes hit the same wall at the same moment, and it rang wrong. Too smooth, too even, made, not grown. Fiona broke it in 3 swings, and it shattered like a pane of glass. Light poured out. On the other side was a meadow, grass, real grass, and flowers in every color, under a ceiling of glass that glowed like a soft sun, warm as a summer afternoon. We were under the sea and standing in a field, and down the middle of it ran rows of pale rectangular crystals, evenly spaced, each one with fresh flowers laid in front of it. Bram stopped dead. My loud, competitive spider went absolutely still and lowered all his legs, and that told me more than any word could have. It's a graveyard, I said quietly, isn't it? He dipped his body once. Yes, somebody had made this. The same hands that built the winery and the altar. The same lost people I'd been chasing through the rock. Fresh flowers meant someone still tended it. I told the others we would look, and we would not touch a single stone. That was when a whole section of the far wall slid open like a door, and the golems came out. They were huge, armored, exactly like the ones I'd fought before, and my hand went to my pickaxe, but they didn't attack. They filed out, took their places along the walls, and simply watched us, guards standing over graves. As long as we walked soft, they let us walk. Sky was trembling. She left my feet and crept up a low hill toward the largest gravestone of them all, and not one golem moved to stop her. I followed, quiet, and I asked her if she knew this place. She didn't answer. She just reached out one small stub of herself and touched the stone. Light exploded out of it. I threw an arm up. When I could see again, a woman was standing in front of the grave, tall, golden-haired, eyes like sunlit water, in a gown sewn with more gems than I'd pulled out of that mine in a year, and she was looking at me the way you look at a light after a long time in the dark. "Hello, Adrian," she said. I made a sound that wasn't a word. Bram had to steady me. She told me her name was Sierra. 10,000 years ago, she had been the empress of an empire that ruled the whole world, until a winter came that never ended, and the crops died, and there was nowhere left to run. Her people couldn't survive in their bodies, so they froze them and poured their souls into slimes to wait out the cold. And then a falling star buried the whole sanctuary in stone and sealed them in the dark. "We have wandered in that dark for 10,000 years, she said. Her voice never rose, and somehow that was worse, until you came down with a light in your hand and started digging. I looked at Sky, my slime, the one I'd used as a pillow and a bath sponge and a bathtub duck for the better part of a year, and I felt my whole face go up in flames. Sierra laughed, gentle and tired, and told me not to apologize. She said she had shared this little body all this time, that she had felt every kindness I'd shown it, and that she was grateful. Then she stopped laughing. She sank down, and though her hand passed clean through the ground, she bowed her head to me like a beggar and not an empress. "My people are still sleeping in that darkness," she said. "Thousands of them. I cannot reach them. You can. Please, Adrian, set them free." I didn't make her ask twice. I said yes before she'd finished. Sky burned through her magic explaining it and slumped back into a plain slime in my hands. So I carried her up and called everyone to the table. The way to free her people ran through a machine, a control device buried at the very bottom of the old city, directly under my cave. It ran the golems. Every golem outside that sacred graveyard would keep attacking anyone who dug near it until the device was shut off. And once it was, the frozen bodies could finally be thawed. Sky laid a map of light across the table, an entire dead city with no streets, just blinkstones linking room to room. And then she folded up and fainted again. My people, being my people, immediately started planning who would kill what. Roland swore he could take a golem barehanded. Walter asked how many they'd face. Ashton wanted numbers. And I sat there and listened to a table full of warriors talk about fighting, and I put my hand flat on the marble. "I don't want to fight them," I said. "I want to not fight them." They all looked at me like I'd started speaking Earth Dragon. "If a golem jumps out while we're digging, someone gets hurt. So we don't dig where they are. We go around. We spiral down from the top, nice and slow, straight to the device, and we skip every fight we can." I shrugged. "Safest tunnel wins. Not the bloodiest." It got quiet, the good kind. The kind where people realized they'd been assuming the wrong thing their whole lives. Fiona volunteered to come down as my guard so Elena could hold the surface. Elena made me swear to come up at noon and dusk every single day. I swore. I'd been thrown away by a family that ruled by taking. I wasn't going to dig my way to these people over a pile of broken golems. That wasn't going to be the story. We spiraled down for days. Then my pickaxe punched through into a space with no floor I could see and a ceiling full of red stars. They weren't stars, they were rocks, black floating rocks, hundreds of them, each with a glowing red pit for a heart. And the moment we broke in, they turned every red point toward us and fired. I threw fire back. It hit them and vanished, swallowed whole, and came back out as a beam of red light. I tried ice. Same thing, spat back at me blue. They ate magic. Every spell we knew, they drank down and returned with interest. Sky tugged my pickaxe. Right. If magic feeds them, hit them with something that isn't. I put my mithril golem at the entrance with a shield, dropped a bubble of protection over the three of us, and we went in swinging steel. The pickaxe worked like a charm. To me, it was just mining. Bram, though. Bram was a nightmare. 4 pickaxes, one in each of 4 legs, dancing off the walls and the ceiling, smashing a rock every heartbeat while he dodged the beams like they were bored at him. Between the two of us, we cleared the whole swarm, and Fiona and I were still grinning when the ceiling opened behind him. The thing that came down was 10 times the size of the rest. Bram hit it first, all 4 pickaxes at full speed, and did nothing, not a scratch. Its single eye began to glow white, and I felt the magic swell in it like a held breath. "Bram, back!" I shouted, and hauled everyone in tight behind the golem's shield, as the whole thing detonated in a blast of white light that shoved us across the floor and rolled Bram up inside his own shield like a ball. We were fine, and the eye, I'd seen it. That eye was the only soft spot on the whole monster, and it sat behind a wall of light beams no one could cross on foot. Bram and I looked at each other and had the same bad idea at the same time. He set his 4 pickaxes on the ground. Without them, he was faster, and he was already faster than a horse. I climbed onto his back, wrapped both arms around him, and held on. Then the giant fired, and Bram ran. I have never been so sick in my life. He went up the wall, across the ceiling, down the far side, ducking and rolling under beams of light that carved the stone where we'd just been, and I clung to his back and swallowed hard and waited. The rock poured everything it had at us, and then, just for a breath, it stopped, emptied out. "Now!" I gasped. "Bram, go!" He launched straight up at the eye. At the top of the leap, I brought my pickaxe around with everything I had left, and I felt it hit and shatter that glowing eye like a dropped lantern. The whole giant came apart with a sound like a stone tower falling. We landed. We didn't fall over, which felt like a miracle. And a voice only I could hear told me the Cave King crest had climbed to rank 4. Wider reach on the auto-collecting now, and it worked out in the open air too. My workshop clicked up a rank with it and learned to pour ingots and blow glass. I clapped Bram's leg and told him he was the fastest thing I'd ever ridden, and also that I was never doing that again. We hadn't been back up top for one full day when the sky went black at noon, not clouds. I came out of the cave and the sun was simply gone, blotted out by something moving, a dark tide rolling across the water straight at the island. My first thought was killer birds. Then Hayden lifted his nose, and his hunter crest never lies, and he told me what it really was. Devil hoppers. Locusts the size of a human head, each one carnivorous, and they don't swarm, except these had crossed an ocean in their millions to reach my rock. We watched a whole flock of killer birds vanish into that cloud in seconds. Nothing left. If they landed, the fields and the world tree were finished, and I wasn't losing the world tree to bugs. I put Fiona and the mithril golem on the cave mouth and told them nothing gets in. Everyone else, up the tower. Walter tore burning lanes through the swarm with his lightning. Roland roared the archers into rhythm. I threw fire until my arms ached and it barely dented them. There were just too many. Then Elena had an idea. Water on the swarm, she said. Then lightning through the wet, the way you fish. It was clever. The only trouble was our water magic couldn't reach that high, and it fell short in a useless spray. And then it rained, only on the hoppers. A hard black downpour opened up directly over the swarm and nowhere else, with an edge to it as clean as a drawn line, and it started from exactly the patch of sky where Elena had thrown her hands. Walter and Elena poured lightning into that rain, and the swarm came apart in sheets. When the last of them dropped, the rain stopped like a tap turned off. Walter fell to his knees and thanked the gods for it. I looked at Elena. She was already turning away, pink and pleased with herself, and pretending she'd done nothing, and I made myself let it go. Later, not now. But I stood there counting on my fingers. A sea serpent, a tide of crabs, now a sky full of hoppers that shouldn't exist. The monsters kept coming, and every time there were more of them than the last, and something under my feet or in that green tree was calling them in. I was going to need a real defense, maybe a real strategist. 2 days after the hoppers, Lily found the last secret. She and Mel had snuck off to dig where they weren't supposed to, and when I caught them, Lily just pointed at the wall and cried until I gave in. Her nose had found Mel's egg once. I'd learned to trust that nose. I swung once. The wall fell in light, and we were standing in a library, a great round room of it, shelves running up walls too high to see, wrapped around a drop into the dark that had no bottom I wanted to test. Thousands of books in a script none of us could read. Picture books of a city with mountains and a river and high white walls. And one heavy volume that Lily and Mel dragged over and pushed into my hands, pointing at themselves, then at me, then miming a mouth opening and closing. It was a book of transformation, painted, page after painted page, a bird becoming a girl, a slime becoming a woman. My two little diggers wanted to learn to talk. They wanted to walk up to me on two legs and say my name. Gus wandered in grinning, grabbed some book off a low shelf, opened it, and fainted flat on his back with a look of pure joy. I didn't ask. I told Sky to make sure the children never got near that particular shelf. I couldn't read a word of any of it, so I gave the whole library to Walter, who took one look at 10,000 years of unreadable books and lit up like it was his birthday. He could fly now. He'd have the shelves and the lower dark mapped in a week, he said, and the scripts cracked not long after. I told him to keep the children out and blamed the drop. We were still at lunch under the tree, arguing happily about whether an island with no money needed shops, when the bell rang. A ship, not one of ours, not Camille's flagless trader, not the little Dutchy boat that had nosed past our waters once before. This one flew a flag I knew from the old life, a red field and a golden tree, baled Dutchy, and it was sitting off my shore with a clear line of sight to everything, the world tree, the walls, the golems on the beach, seeing all of it. Walter said the sensible thing. He said it low so the others wouldn't hear, and he wasn't wrong. One ship, one splash. Sink it, and no word of Bona Reef ever reaches the mainland, and everyone on this rock stays safe and hidden for another year. I watched the sail, and I thought about my father. Somewhere north of here, a man on a throne had handed me a bare rock to die on, and never once looked at me while he did it. If that ship sailed home, the odds were good. He'd finally learned the son he threw away had built something worth having, and the fastest way to make sure he never found out was to murder a boat full of strangers whose only crime was drifting into my waters. I'd have been the court all over again. I'd have been him. No, I said. Let it go. Walter let out a breath he'd been holding and told me that of course I was still me, and that he'd follow me wherever that led. The ship raised white sails and turned north for home, and I let it. I stood on my own shore and watched it shrink, and I made my peace with what it carried. The world was going to know I was alive. My father was going to know. Let him. I'd rather be seen for what I'd built than hide behind a thing I'd killed. There was still a machine humming in the dark beneath my feet, waiting to wake 10,000 sleepers. There was still whatever the golems were really guarding down at the bottom of it. Some old power the deep hadn't shown me yet. And now, there was a sail on the horizon carrying my name back toward a throne. I turned around, picked up my pickaxe, and went back down to dig. It was the only answer I'd ever really trusted. Whatever was coming up that horizon, I'd meet it the way I met everything now. From a home I made myself, out of bone and salt and other people's graves, one honest swing at a time. The morning the black sails came, I was standing at the end of my own dock with a pickaxe still in my hand. 3 ships, old, high-sided things, flying a yellow flag with a black dragon on it, and a swarm of little boats already rowing for my shore. I did not know the flag, and everything that had ever come to this rock came because it wanted something. Roland wanted to sink them before they landed. He said it the way he said everything, loud enough for the fish to hear. Wait, I told him. One boat carried a white flag. A small blue-haired boy stood in the bow, waving it and shouting words the wind ate. Walter squinted at him a long moment. Frightened half to death, he said. The ones behind him are not. Then we talked to the frightened one first. The boy's name was Belfort, and he spoke our tongue in a careful, apologizing rush, like a man laying coins on a table, one at a time. His people were from a dragon kingdom across the water. Wormgard, he called it. They had been mapping a coast, been beaten badly by the Soulfire Navy a week back, lost half their fleet, and now they were out of water and food, and carrying more wounded than they could tend. He asked very quietly if we would help them. Behind him stood their commander, a tall man with strange webbed ears and a fine feathered helmet, and he did not look at me the way a man looks at someone he is begging from. He looked at my world tree, at the gold on my soldier's gear, did the sun behind his eyes, and smiled like the answer pleased him. When I named myself the master of the island, his gaze dropped to my pickaxe, and the smile widened, and I understood him completely. He thought he was looking at a miner who had gotten lucky. I told Belfort we could spare food and water, and that our healers would treat the wounded, on the one condition that every man came ashore unarmed. The commander agreed too easily. "Boss," Roland muttered as the boat pulled back, "is this really all right?" It wasn't. But turning away, a boat of the wounded, was one thing I had promised myself I would never do, back when I was the one the sea had thrown away. So I would let them land. I just wasn't going to let them land the way they thought. The wounded came first, and they were real. Elena and the healers laid them on spider silk beds and worked over them. Then I watched the boats keep coming and coming until near 1,000 men stood on my shore. That was the tell. Nobody escorts a handful of sick men with 1,000 bodies. Their commander had asked to rest his whole crew on the island overnight, and I had said yes to all of it, and told Roland to storm off cursing my softness where the dragon men could see, so they'd believe the master of Bonareef was exactly the fool they hoped for. While they filed ashore, my people closed a ring around them without looking like they were doing it. Firecasters at the edges, Bram and his spiders up in the rocks, and down at the waterline, the great golem, the huge one Gus had shaped in his own likeness, standing where it could reach the ships. Belfort found me in the crowd, shaking, and got the words out anyway. "Please forgive me," he whispered. "They are not only men, and the commander does not mean to leave." I told him I knew. I told him to get down and stay down. Then the commander showed his true shape. His body twisted and swelled into a small dragon, wings and all, and he announced to my island that we were a lesser breed, that we could kneel and be spared, or stand and be eaten. His men began to change with him. I already knew the one thing that undid them. Walter had told me the old story weeks back. The dragon people carry their strength in their wings, and fire in the wings ends it. Now, I said, I will keep the rest short because it was short. My firecasters put flame across those wings before they ever caught the air, and a dragon that cannot fly is just a proud man on the ground with nothing left to be proud of. Bram's silk took the ones that thrashed. The commander bolted for his ship, and my great golem simply closed one stone hand around him and held on. And it was over. Nobody died. I had told them not to kill, and they hadn't, and I stood in the quiet afterward more relieved than I wanted to admit. The last thing we did was walk down to the ships and unlock the rowers, the real slaves, scarred and chained to their oars by the same men who had just called me the lesser breed. Belfort went down the line, telling them they were free, glancing back at me like he didn't believe the word himself. Over 1,000 dragon men sat in the sand, ears scorched, and without their wings, they had gone thin and gray and old in a single afternoon. Some still cursed me. Most just stared at the ground. Belfort brought me a folded paper, an insurance note worth enough to buy a nobleman's house, and he wanted me to have it as thanks. I told him it was his. He had been a slave an hour ago. A man who has just gotten his life back does not owe me the price of a house. Then I had a choice to make in front of everyone, and I could feel people waiting to see which way I'd go. I could have put the aggressors to the oars. It would have been fair, near enough, turning the chains around, letting the men who chained others feel the weight. My own people half expected it. I didn't. We have no slaves on Bonarif, I said. I said it loud, so the ones in the sand would hear it too. We never have, and we never will, not even you. So I hired Belfort instead. I gave him one of the captured ships, and a wage, and a letter, and told him to carry these men home as prisoners of war and hand them to their king with my terms written plain. And that was where the real trouble opened up, because a letter needs a name at the bottom, and mine was the problem. I was still, on paper, a lord of the Soulfire Kingdom, my father's kingdom. Send 1,000 foreign prisoners home under that name. And I dragged the man who threw me on this rock into a war I'd started without asking him, so I didn't sign it as his. This island isn't a piece of anyone's kingdom, I told them. Walter, Roland, Belfort, the whole listening shore. As of today, it's its own country. It has a name, Bonarif, and it answers to no crown across that water. Roland let out a roar and threw his fist up, and half my people were grinning, and somebody was already shouting that we'd need a throne, a hall, a king. No, I said. That stopped them. Build the hall if it makes the world take us seriously. Build the whole shining front of it, but the chair stays empty. I looked at the water in the direction I knew the mainland lay. I didn't come here to rule anybody. I came here because nobody wanted me. I'm not going to sit on a throne to prove them wrong. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to, and steadier. I'll answer to no king, not the one who sent me here to die, and not any that come after him. And neither will anyone standing on this rock. We're no one's subjects. Not anymore. Nobody argued. Walter bowed his great horned head, and I could see him already composing the letter in his mind. What none of us said out loud was that the name on that letter would not stay as small as I wanted. Belfort read it in his cabin that night, and where I had said a country, the paper said an empire, the Bonarif Empire, and its emperor, it seemed, was me. The word was already moving toward the mainland. I just hadn't heard it leave. After that, I went back to building, because building was the only thing that ever quieted my head. We were raising a wall around the front of the island, the face we'd show the world. When I touched a sample of Gus's hand-mixed mortar, my crest swallowed it and handed me the trick, and I built the rest myself, spraying it out of my bare hand like a fool with a hose. By afternoon, the wall stood 4 or 5 times my height, as fine as the royal capitals. That was when the bee turned up. It came down out of nowhere, big as a man and already hurt. A chewed wing, old wounds, its belly swollen. It stung Gus, who took it about as well as Gus takes anything, and then Bram's silk snapped out and reeled the thing in like a fish before it could do worse. Hayden already had an arrow drawn. Wait, I said. It wasn't attacking. It was just spent and bleeding on my new floor. So I healed it. I don't know why, except that healing things had worked out better for me than killing them. Every single time on this rock. When the wounds closed, the bee did the only thing it knew how to do, to say thank you. It sprayed honey all over my face. Hayden licked a drop off his glove and made a sound I'd never heard a grown kobold make. The voice offered me the tame, and I took it and named her Buzz, and gave her the world tree to nest in. I thought I was collecting another mouth to feed. I'd actually just found the fastest way to get somewhere in a hurry. A few days later, deep underground, Fiona and Bram and I dug into something that dug back. Red lights in the dark, hundreds of them. When we broke through, I braced for a swarm and found slimes instead. Gray ones, sluggish and half-hard. Nothing like Sky. Sky flowed straight up to them and tried to talk, and got almost nothing back. Barely any magic in them at all. Sky went very still, which for Sky is the same as crying. Then one of the gray ones lifted a pickaxe. It was chipping at the wall, a grain of rock at a time, going nowhere and refusing to stop. Sky poked it and it jumped, and I understood I was looking at something that used to be a person. Sky spelled it out for me in letters smeared across the floor. The sleepers under this rock had their souls poured into slime bodies to save them, and it had cost them nearly everything they used to be. This one was clawing its way back up out of that with a pickaxe. I knew the feeling. It tapped the wall, pointing. I dug where it pointed, the rock fell away, and behind it sat a skull, a huge human-shaped skull, far too big, and I knew it because I'd seen its twin at my own cave mouth the first week I lived on this island. Before I could chase that thought, every gray slime in the room turned at once and looked past me. Gus had walked in. I expected them to cower. Instead, they went stiff with what I can only call outrage. Sky, translating, could barely keep up. They weren't afraid of Gus. They were appalled that he was naked. A proud dwarf, they said, running around with nothing on. And what on earth were his parents thinking? See? Fiona said, folding her arms. I told you he was weird. I asked Sky to put the obvious question, and the answer came back as a single number, plain against the floor. Gus was 7 years old. 7. I'd have believed the Leviathan walking out of the sea before I believed that. This bearded, barrel-chested old man who forged mithril in his sleep was a child, and had been the whole time. He struck a proud little pose, delighted with himself, and I sat down on a rock and put my face in my hands. Around 200 of them came up into the light. They were dwarves, or they had been. Their true bodies were gone. The same falling star that had buried this whole dead country had crushed the vault where those bodies slept, and all that was left of them were skulls, and the gray slime shells they lived in now. Elena told me softly what that meant, and I watched 200 people learn that there was no going back to themselves. They just stopped moving. Grief looks the same on a slime as on anyone. Gus watched them a while. Then he went to the forge without a word, because Gus never has a word, and he worked. He came out carrying a golden axe, covered in patterns none of us could read, and he lifted it over his head, and the sky answered. Lightning came straight down and hit him. His hair went gold and stood on end, and the light crawled all over him, and I shouted his name, sure I'd just watched a 7-year-old die on my own island. He hadn't. He stood there smoking and grinning, and the gray slimes moved, all 200 of them at once, bowing low. Sky wrote it out with a trembling body. That axe was a thing only their royal line could make, a Storm King's axe, and to see one meant a child of the old kings was still alive. One slime picked up a hammer and walked to the forge, then another, then all of them, taking their places like they'd never left, the craft flowing back into ruined hands that had forgotten everything else. They had lost their bodies. They had not lost how to make things. It turned out that was enough to stand back up on. Gus collapsed a moment later. The axe was short some material. He'd sulk about that for days, and Elena healed him while he drooled happily in the dirt. We kept digging after that deeper, toward the thing Sky needed most, a control device at the bottom of the dead city that might wake the rest of the sleepers. But the rock turned hard and strange, and my crest started pulling up star iron, the metal of fallen stars, far too much of it, enough that Sky went quiet again. That much fallen star in one place meant the meteor had come down close, and if it had, the device we were digging toward might already be broken. We didn't say it out loud, we just dug faster. The bell for Camille's homecoming and the alarm for a sea monster rang so close together they were almost the same sound. Her ship came over the horizon under its black flag, Camille herself flying out ahead of it like she couldn't wait the extra minute, and behind the ship the water was full of long pale shapes, dozens of them, all belonging to one thing, a kraken, big enough to take a ship sideways, a nest of thin tentacles, and no face worth the name. Fiona groaned that Camille had brought home another disaster, which was fair. My great golem waded in first and put fire across the thing, and the kraken let it come and then wrapped it up in a dozen arms at once. What happened next I won't fully explain, except that Gus had at some point taught that golem a set of ridiculous dances, and being squeezed set off every one of them at once. The golem thrashed through a whole performance while bound to a sea monster. Gus hid his face. Everyone did. It was the least dignified battle of my life, and it was still going. The kraken hadn't lost any strength. I could feel that much, and I needed to get close. There was too much water between us. Then Buzz dropped out of the sky trailing a rope, and I understood what she was for. I grabbed on. I hate heights, always have, and I hung off a bee over open sea, swallowing my own stomach, while she carried me straight at a mountain of tentacles. One of them swung for us. I put every scrap of lightning I had into it at arm's length. Lightning and salt water do a thing together. The bolt didn't stay in the one arm. It forked through all of them at once, through every wet rope of that creature, and the whole kraken seized and shuddered and dropped into the sea like a cut net, all at once. Done. Camille came rocketing over to tell me how magnificent I was, arms wide, and Buzz banked hard and dropped her in the water, which was the correct decision. My golem hauled the corpse up onto the shore like a trophy, still twitching now and then into a dance step, and my whole island stood on the wall and roared. Camille had done well out there, drowning notwithstanding. She'd spent barely half our treasure and come home with everything, grain and seed from every corner of the mainland, cattle and sheep and goats in pairs, dogs, cats, crates of books. 200 more people too, goblins and kobolds and orcs who had bought their way out of slavery and heard there was an island where a monster could simply live. I went to greet every one of them because I remembered being somewhere I wasn't wanted, and I was never going to run that place. The books were mostly simple ones. Enough, though. Enough to finally build the thing I'd been wanting for a while, a school, so every child and every grown monster on this rock who'd never been allowed to learn their letters could learn them now. Then Camille handed me a paper off the top of a crate, half joking about the gossip in it, and the joke went out of the day. There was a headline on it from the mainland. A duke had been arrested. Duke Bale. The kingdom had folded up his whole house, and his daughter had gone missing in the middle of it. Her and a handful of her family's treasures vanished before the soldiers could shut the door. I knew the name under the dukes. Layla. She had been my betrothed once. Back in the life where I was a prince nobody would miss. A girl I'd been promised to and barely allowed to know. Now her father was in a cell, and she was out there somewhere in the dark, with her family's heirlooms, and no house left to shelter her. Elena watched my face and asked gently whether I was all right. "I'm fine," I said. I told her Layla was strong, stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for, and that if she disappeared on purpose, with a plan. I believed that. I mostly believed it. I folded the paper and set it down and said we should get the school started, but I stood there a while longer and did the arithmetic I'd been avoiding. A dragon fleet had found me and sailed home talking. A trade ship had found me. Now the kingdom that threw me away was tearing itself apart over dukes and daughters, and every current in that mess ran downhill toward one small, rich island that had just started calling itself a country. I'd wanted to be left alone on my rock. I'd built something too big to leave alone. The world had found Bonarif, and it was coming. I could feel it the way you feel the weather turn. And somewhere out on that same sea, a girl from the life I'd lost was already sailing toward my shore. I picked up my pickaxe and went back down to dig. It was still the only answer I trusted, but I dug with one ear turned toward the water now. The last wall came down under my pickaxe, and the dark on the other side was bigger than anything I'd broken into yet. We rode the trolley to the bottom for this, all of us. Sky riding my shoulder, Bram at my back, Fiona and Gus tagging along, because Gus will follow raw stone anywhere. Beyond the broken wall opened a hall the size of a parade ground, domed and pale, and in the center of it stood a white altar studded with glowing stones, set in neat rows like bottles in a cellar. "Don't touch anything," Fiona warned, mostly at Gus. Bram put one long leg between the smith and the altar, and Gus threw his hands up like a man swearing off wine. Sky went up onto the altar and pressed a stone. The walls woke. All around us, the stone bloomed into water and light, and in the light were people, rows of them, hundreds, asleep and floating, as if they'd only just shut their eyes. I understood before Fiona finished her question. These were the bodies, the real ones. The souls that lived as slimes on my island had come from these sleepers 10,000 years ago, when the world above this place was still a nation, and half the wall was dark, whole rows gone black, that many bodies already lost. Sky's little body went still, then it steeled itself and pressed another stone, the one for the golems, I guessed, and nothing happened. It tried another, nothing. It began pressing faster, frantic, the way a person pats their pockets when the thing they need is already gone. A voice came out of a hole that opened in the far wall, cold and pleased with itself. "Useless," it said. "With that, you'll never move my puppets." Two small lights lit in the dark like eyes. "Who are you?" I asked. The voice swelled up grand. It announced itself as a great strategist, an incarnation of a war god who moved all things and even the stars. And then it laughed to shake the dome. We all just stood there. Fiona said, "What?" The laugh trailed off, a little hurt, and the voice muttered that our reaction was awfully thin. Then it ordered its comrades to seize us. One human-sized golem lit up, clad head to foot in mithril. Holes opened along the walls, and more of them stepped out. Dozens, all identical, all armed. Not one of them moved. The voice tried again, louder, still nothing. I heard it fumbling at something, tapping, muttering, and I knew this shape of panic because I'd just watched Sky make it. "Gus," I said, and nodded at the altar. Gus tapped it with his hammer, grinning, and the voice yelped for us to stop. It begged. It said something bad would happen. When I asked why it didn't want us to look, it went quiet. And then, very small, it asked us to please just fight it, just once. It only wanted to know what winning felt like. I looked at the frozen army, and the frozen army looked at nothing, and I made the only move that fit. "What if I just admit defeat?" The dome rang. "I won! I finally won!" The device slid open, and out flopped an octopus. Reddish 8 legs, an enormous head, and enormous eyes. One leg wrapped around a little yellow stone it spoke through. Gus started drooling. Fiona said, flat, "It's an octopus." The creature drew itself up to its full unimpressive height and insisted it was a proud member of a proud tribe. "Thank you." Sky told me the rest without a word, letters smearing across the whetstone. The thing had fallen to this world inside a star long before the meteor and been raised alone in a tank and taught itself to talk from a single old book and named itself after the hero in it, an exiled foundling who'd waited 10,000 years for someone to lose to. I knew that arithmetic too well to walk away from it. "Come up to the surface with us," I said. It took that as a summons to serve, swore itself to me on the spot, weeping, calling itself my great strategist, Ares. I let it stand. The black shadow came out of the golem hole before Ares finished bowing. It was a chimera, a lion in the front, a goat's head riding its back, a snake for a tail, and it had grown to twice the size of an elephant down here in the dark, fed fat on cave stones. Ares went rigid on my shoulder and told me, fast, that this thing was a man-eater, that it ate its own kind, that it had nearly killed him more times than he could count. He ordered his golems in anyway, some 50 of them charged with mithril blades. The chimera swept its snake tail once, and they came apart, bodies shattered, armor scattered whole across the floor, the mithril too tough to break even as the golems inside it burst. Debris flew at us. I threw a shield over Ares and me, and it rang like hail. Then Ares gave me his plan. "Hold the shield on him," he said, "and throw him at the lion's head. He would pin the beast and I could strike." I hesitated. He swore he wouldn't die, swore the plan was perfect. Before I could argue, Gus grabbed him by one leg, spun him around like a hammer until Ares spat a ribbon of black ink through the air and hurled him. Ares landed square on the beast's brow, declared his victory, and the snake tail folded up and swallowed him whole. "Told you," Fiona said. The chimera started to thrash, bucking and slamming itself against the walls, and I realized Ares was very much alive inside it and dumping every drop of poison he had. I swung up onto Bram's back to get close enough to strike clean without hitting my new strategist. I never got the chance. The beast stopped. It shook itself, walked over, and sat down in front of me like a dog waiting for breakfast. Something in the dark asked if I wanted to tame it. I did. I named it Mike, and the fight was over before it was a fight. I asked Mike to give my strategist back, and it bowed its lion head and coughed Ares out onto the stone in a wash of slime. A little water magic, and he sputtered back to life, thanking me, insisting the whole swallowing had been his design all along, his rare and secret poison, his genius, his plan. I let him have it. Sky gave a small nod, so I took Ares in for real, and he pledged himself again and told me he could see it, a burning ambition like the sun, hidden behind my calm face. I really truly didn't have one, but there's no arguing with an octopus who's finally won. We gathered up what the golems left, the little heart stones that beat inside them, the magic stones, arms and armor of mithril, and set the slimes to carrying it all. Fiona was delighted. I couldn't get there. Sky had gone off to the altar and stayed bent over it, and I knew that shape too. I went and asked if I could help. It told me the truth in smeared letters. The golem controls worked now. That part was done. But the star that had killed this empire had destroyed most of the sleeping bodies outright, and it had cracked the machine that was meant to wake the rest. The ones still whole in their water couldn't be brought back, not as things stood. Sky called it its own failure, its own fault for trusting the deep layers to be safe. When I was alone on this rock, I said, "You were the one who came. You don't get to carry this by yourself." It didn't argue. It pressed a stone instead, and a second altar rose out of the floor under glass, and on it sat a crown, old gold, colored gems, a clear crystal at its heart that hummed with more magic than the whole cave, the crown of a dead empire. Sky offered it to me. I didn't want a crown. I said so. But when Gus crept up and stared at the workmanship like a man in church, I couldn't stand the thought of melting it down either. So I took it, for the island, not for my head. Sky showed me the rest of the vault, a scepter, an orb, blades of mithril and crystal, and a strange liquid metal that ran green when it moved and set hard and red when it stopped. That could take any shape you asked of it. Then, far above us, a bell rang. A ship had been sighted from the sea. By the time I climbed to the surface, the beach was a wall of readiness. Elena met me at the tide line. "The defenses are set," she said. "The ballistae can put that ship under without a single spell. We're only waiting on you." The ship was a small schooner, no flag flying, which meant it could be a trader or a pirate or a scout, and I had no way to know which. I sent a boarding party out to look. Camille for the sea, Walter for the magic, Hayden for the nose. Walter came flying back ahead of the others and landed kneeling in the sand. "Humans," he reported, "off a fallen duchy, a merchant, and a noblewoman who would only speak to me and only alone." She came ashore and lifted the hat from her head, and the wind took a fall of silver hair, and it was Layla, my betrothed, the one the court had promised me a lifetime ago, before the word Cave King made me a joke. The daughter of a duke whose whole house had just been folded up and swallowed by the same crown that threw me away, vanished. the newspaper had said. Gone with the family treasures. And here she stood on my beach. It's been a while, she said, like we'd missed one appointment. She'd heard a rumor, she told me. A place at the far edge of the sea where every kind of creature lived side by side, free. That was her family's old dream, the empire her house had ruled in its golden age, when all races shared one crown. She'd sent the first ship out of curiosity. She'd come herself because the rumor sounded like her ideal made real, and she had brought it something. Two of her people carried up a case and opened it, and inside lay a crown and a scepter, the imperial regalia of that lost empire, real gold gone soft with age. If you mean to rule them all, Layla said, holding my eyes, you'll need these. An emperor without regalia is only a man shouting on a rock. I never said one word about being an emperor, I told her, and Walter, still on one knee in the sand, went very quiet. Gently, like a man setting down something breakable, he explained that the council had already settled it while I was underground. Not king, emperor. A king would rank beneath the princesses the island already sheltered, and that wouldn't do. So, emperor, and the letter that had gone out to the Dragon Kingdom, the one carrying our terms across the water, that letter had gone out signed by the emperor of the Bonarif Empire, me, a word I had never once chosen, already sailing toward the mainland with my name under it. I stood on my own shore holding a crown in each hand, and I hadn't reached for either one. The sand tilted a little under me, and I sat down in it, hard, and let the sky spin. I came back to myself with my head on Elena's lap, and two crowns catching the light on the table. I'm sorry, my lord, Elena said. We couldn't understand what you wanted. I told her the fault was mine. I'd spent so long refusing a crown out loud that no one heard me refuse the word behind it. But the word was loose now, and I made myself think it all the way through. Merchant ships out of the Amorous Republic would carry the news across the sea in weeks. My father would read it exactly one way. The son he'd sent to die had crowned himself and raised an army of monsters within reach of the coast. Rebellion, in the only language a king speaks. Couldn't you send word that it was a mistake? Elena asked. It's too late for that. Take it back now, after the name had already gone to another nation, and I'd look like a liar and a coward in the same breath, and my people would look like fools who'd overreached. Layla said, evenly, that an empire could still be a republic underneath the crown. Her family's had been, at its height. That wasn't what kept me up. I turned it over and found no soft way out. I could sail to the capital and kneel. I could offer my father my life, and none of it would matter because a rival king on his doorstep is a thing a man like my father has to erase, whatever face the rival wears. So I stopped running from the word. Then I'll be what they're already calling me, I said. Not to rule anyone, to stand in front of them. Every soul on this rock came here because nowhere else would have them. I won't hand them back. If the kingdom comes to put us down, they'll find a country, not a colony, and I'll answer to no king to keep it that way. We're no one's subjects. Not anymore. Elena didn't say anything. She just took my hand, and Layla, by the door, allowed herself the smallest satisfied breath, as if a bet had finally come in. Across the water, in the city that had thrown me out, the word arrived faster than I feared. A fast Navy ship cut into the royal harbor at dusk, ahead of any trade rumor, carrying a report from a colonel who'd stopped and searched a merchant vessel out of Amorous. I wasn't there to see it. I only had to picture it, and the picturing wasn't hard. The report said the 17th prince was alive, that the boy sent to die on the skeleton reef had not died, that he called himself an emperor now and lived among monsters and ruled them. On the rock, they'd all watched him be handed as a grave. The court came apart. Some of the nobles roared that it was open rebellion, that the reject meant to lead his monsters back to take revenge on the men who'd laughed at him. Some refused to believe a word of it. No one survives that reef, they said. There is no world tree. There are no monsters. The whole thing is a merchant's tall tale. The naval minister cut across them all. His colonel did not send anything he had not seen with his own eyes. And so the order went down through the shouting, ready the navy, ready the fleet that would sail to my shore and end the joke for good. And the one man on the dais who did not shout, who did not rage or doubt, my father the king. He only smiled to himself, quiet and unreadable, as though this were precisely the news he had been waiting a long time to hear. That was the war I had lit without meaning to. It stopped being my private fear the moment a fleet had orders. Somewhere out past the horizon, a kingdom was turning its whole weight toward a rock that a year ago it couldn't be bothered to remember the name of. So I called everyone to the round table under the tree, with both crowns sitting in the middle where no one could pretend they weren't there. Roland slammed a fist down and said if the kingdom wouldn't listen, we'd drive them off. Simple as that. Ashton and Hayden nodded along. Camille preened that our navy could at least look like a first-rate fleet, even if it wasn't one. Walter asked me plainly how we truly measured up. I told them the truth. We could crush the small fleet the kingdom would send first. That was exactly the problem. Beat that fleet and my father sends a bigger one, and a bigger one after that, until the sea between us is nothing but wreckage. We chewed on hiding instead. Fiona offered a plan. The human-like ones stay above ground. Everyone else waits in the caves until the visitors leave. Roland hated it on sight. Walter pointed out dryly that whatever else we tucked away, we could not hide a tree that scraped the clouds. Layla had been silent the whole time. Now she set her hands on the table. "You're all crouching," she said, "like people who did something wrong. You didn't." She let that sit. "This is a home where every race lives free. Stand up and say so, and dare them to tell you it's a crime." Roland demanded to know who this silver-haired human thought she was. Layla told him, flatly, that she was my betrothed, which set Roland off like a powder keg, bellowing that the only ones marrying the boss were the princess, or, failing that, his own daughter, absolutely no stray duchesses, until Elena and Fiona quietly stopped his voice with a touch of water magic and a smile I chose not to examine. Then Layla laid out the real plan, and it was clever enough to quiet even Roland. "Gold won't sway men who hate us," she said, "and threats only harden them, but doubt might. Make them see humans living here by choice, beside monsters at ease. Take that shifting liquid metal from the vault and shape figures with human faces. Raise a few kingdom-style houses along the shore. Build them a street where human and monster share a well and a market, and let the inspector's certainty that we are beasts crack right down the middle." It was a lie. I said so, plainly, and I still agreed to it, because the other road was a burning fleet. I agreed to more than that, to make us a true government in the open, deciding together. Walter as chancellor, Camille over the navy and the sea, and Layla, who asked for it herself, as the empire's diplomat, on the one condition I set, and she accepted. No bargain struck without all of us knowing. I picked up the heavier crown, the old dead empire's, and set it back down. "All right," I said, "the Bonarif Empire, a country that answers to itself." The word didn't choke me that time. 3 days later, I saw them off from the dock, Camille and Layla, both dressed like they were boarding a palace instead of a ship. Emeralds and diamonds from our own mines at Layla's throat. The story we'd tell was that they were sailing to the Amoris Republic to recruit settlers for the island. The truth ran deeper. Amoris was a merchant nation with a weak army and a navy that could stand against the kingdoms, and it sat across the sea from the mainland, which made it the one ally worth crossing water for. Layla meant to win it the way merchants are won, with gifts to the governor and every noble who mattered, which is a polite word for buying them. And in the same trip, she'd send letters to every exiled house the crown had scattered across the world, all the people who'd learned the hard way, what my father's kingdom does to those it decides it's done with. If any of them wanted a shore that would have them, we had one now. "Nobody may even want to come," Camille sighed at the gangplank, and then brightened, because Camille cannot stay gloomy near a compliment. I told them both they looked the part, and Camille found somewhere else to look, pleased. Layla stopped at the top of the plank and turned back. "When we return," she said, "we'll hold a ceremony. See that you're ready for it." Camille added that they'd buy a ship's hold of food and instruments, that it would be a grand one, and the two of them shared a look I didn't have the wit to read. A welcome home feast, I figured. "All right," I said, "we'll have everything ready." The first ship of my empire went out to find us a friend, and somewhere past the edge of the sea, a kingdom I was born into was readying a fleet to wipe us off the map. I stood on the dock a while after the sail went small, and then I did the only thing that has ever settled me. I went and found my pickaxe, and I went back down to dig. But I dug with both ears on the water now, and a crown I never wanted waiting on a table behind me. I tipped the little bottle of liquid metal over my mithril sentry, and one breath later, there were two of me standing on the shore. The metal ran green while it moved and set hard where it stopped. It climbed the sentry's smooth silver body, took my height, my face, my tired eyes, and held there, a copy so exact I wanted to look away from it. When I told it to be Roland instead, it thickened into a slab of green muscle, wearing a general's scowl. "There are two of me," Roland bellowed, delighted, flexing at his own reflection. Fiona tilted her head. "The face is a little better than yours, Dad." Roland's jaw came unhinged. Gus shoved to the front and slapped his own bare chest, begging without a word to be copied next. And the sentry, I swear it hesitated, dropped back to plain silver for a heartbeat before it gave him what he wanted. Even a doll seemed to have opinions about Gus. I capped the bottle. There was a cupful left, maybe, and I already knew what a lake of it could do. Human faces on my golems. A quiet way to walk my people through a world that would scream at the sight of them. But a cupful was not not a lake. There's more of it under the island, I said. A whole store, if the octopus is right. Elena leaned out the workshop door long enough to promise me milk gratin if I came home in one piece, which was, honestly, most of my reason for going at all. We went down light, me with a pickaxe, Bram the spider, Fiona, Sky, the silver sentry, and Ares riding on the sentry's head like a small red king. The tunnel ran straight and dark. Within minutes it opened, and the dark on the far side was bigger than any dark I had ever broken into. A city. Not a cave, not a ruin, a city. Spires and domes past counting, wider than the Capitol that had thrown me away, laid out under a ceiling so high it pretended to be a night sky. Fiona forgot how to talk. Ares said he did not see the fuss. He had once hidden from a whole pack of the local monsters for a full year inside a salt jar, and he told it the way another man tells you it looks like rain. The streets were spotless. No dust, no mold, no weeds. Sky pointed a limb at the walls and I saw them. Slimes, hundreds of them, sliding over the stone, scrubbing a dead city clean for masters who were never coming back. Somebody had built all this to last, and then the sky had fallen on them anyway. The howling started ahead of us. Chimeras, Ares said. They ran in factions, and a single scent of blood would bring the whole pack down, so we made sure not to spill any. We had no invisibility magic and only one job, which was to look and come back. So we went quiet and we went the long way. When a pack drifted across our road, Bram looked straight up and clicked, and his own kind answered him. Blue cave spiders, smaller cousins, came down their own silk in a red-eyed flood that made Ares shriek and dive behind the sentry. They dropped a net over the monsters and stitched their mouths shut without a drop spilled. Ares, once he stopped shaking, sprayed a breath of his poison down each throat, and the fight drained out of them like air from a bladder. I tamed them where they lay and sent them back to guard the door behind us. It turned into a rhythm, spider silk, a mouthful of poison, another tamed guard trotting off like a scolded dog. No blood, no bodies. We had come to see the place, not to butcher it, and I meant to keep it that way. Sky hauled a handle, and the storehouse opened on light, tanks of it. Great glass drums of the liquid metal, glowing gold with no lamp to feed them, enough to fill a small lake, and then some more. Fiona breathed that it was bright enough to read by. I was already running sums in my head. How many faces, how many golems, when I heard running behind us. Gus. Of course it was Gus. He came sprinting out of the dark, bare feet slapping the stone, a wall of furious chimeras at his heels. Having smelled the metal straight through solid rock, the way he always smells treasure, he hit the smooth floor, lost every scrap of traction, and slid past all of us on his belly, straight into a tank. The glass went. The metal took him. Not good! Gus! I shouted, but the gold was already moving, already climbing him, and he lifted one hand out of it to tell me to wait. It gathered. It grew. It stood him up twice my height and then higher. A giant of poured gold with Gus grinning somewhere at the heart of it. And when that giant flexed a single huge arm, the chimeras at the door forgot how to be brave. There was no back way out. The only door was the front, and the front was teeth. So we climbed the giant instead. Gus carried us out into the city on gold shoulders, while every monster in that dead place scattered like spilled beads. Bram waved his legs to tell his own cousins we were friends. They fled anyway. I clung to a golden collarbone with my eyes shut, because I have never once made peace with heights, and we reached the entrance without swinging a single blade. Most of the metal came home with us in my inventory. I left Gus a chunk the size of a hut. He looked at it the way a child looks at a toy he gets to keep. Back in the light, I poured the metal over my golems and let them keep it this time. The silver sentry rose up out of the gold, a man, tall, bearded, noble as an old painting, with a low, courteous voice that made half the island go soft. He bowed and thanked them all for staring. I joked about crowning him and handing over the whole job. Nobody laughed harder than me. Better than the face, though, was the trick underneath it. My giants could now shrink themselves small enough to fit down a tunnel and through a human door. A whole army of dead-eyed stone, suddenly able to wear a person's shape and walk into a person's world. The newest golems came out of the gold shy, human-shaped, blinking, going red when they understood we could see them. And once the island worked out what the leftover metal did, the whole afternoon turned into a festival. Fiona painted herself into a copy of her own father and struck all his poses. Roland answered by swelling into a mountain of muscle with a comically tiny head, and the two of them stood there arguing about whose arms were more real. Hayden bullied his brother into taking the shape of a lady kobold to charm a smile out of little Lily. Lily took one look, whimpered, and refused to be charmed, and Hayden nearly went down laughing. I was still grinning at all of it when Elena crouched by the last of the metal, dipped a hand in, and quietly became someone I had not seen in a long time. Small, round, green. The little goblin girl I had carried up out of the surf half dead, before any stone in the world ever changed her. She looked up at me from all the way down there and smiled like it was a joke between us. "Adrian," she said, "you look so big from here. Everything does." She turned her small green hands over and studied them. "This is how I saw you the first time." The others had wandered off toward the cooking fires. It was just the two of us and the last of the light, and I felt the whole practiced habit of my life come up out of me the way it always does. Deflect, make a joke, ask her for gratin, change the subject to anything safer. For once, I let it fall. "What did you think of me?" she asked. Back then, when I was this small, I could have hidden. There is a version of me that would have. I had spent a whole long story asking this woman for little things. One more meal, one more towel woven from spider silk, one more small reason to stand near her, because little things are safe and the true thing is not. I crouched down until we were eye to eye. "I loved you the moment I met you," I said. "You were dying in the sand, and you thanked me because the pain had stopped. And that was it. That was the whole thing. I was gone. Then, now, in whatever shape you happen to be wearing. I have loved you the entire time, and I have been a coward about ever saying it out loud, so I am saying it out loud. I love you, Elena." For a second, she only stared, small and green and stunned. Then her whole face crumpled, and she was crying and laughing at once. Both little hands pressed hard to her mouth. "I love you too," she managed. "I always did, in every shape too." I did not tell her the rest of it. That standing there in the dusk, I decided flatly. The way I decide to break open a wall, I was going to marry her. A ring she never saw coming. A day she could not brace for. I had built an empire I never asked for. I could surely build her that. We sat together in the last of the amber light and watched the others play, and I let myself, just the once, be a man who had gotten to keep something good. Lily woke me before dawn by tugging my collar and pointing hard at the door. The eggs were shaking. All 31 of them, 30 wyvern eggs, and the single fire dragon egg the earth dragon merchant had once sold me, rocking in their warm stone hut, while Elena knelt among them with her sleeves shoved up. The fire egg split first. A small red thing tumbled loose, wet and trembling, took one look at the enormous world it had woken into, and shook with pure fear. Elena scooped it up, and it only shook harder. Then Lily and Mel traded a glance, screwed their little faces up tight, and turned themselves into baby dragons. They had taught themselves, 2 children not yet a year old, copying a shape out of a book Sky had found, wobbling on brand new dragon legs to press up against the frightened newborn, until at last it went quiet and slept. "Name him," Elena whispered. I looked at the little furnace breathing in her hands. "Ember," I said, and a quiet voice at the back of my skull told me the taming had taken. Ember was mine now. Then the wyverns started cracking, all 30 at once, and it stopped being tender and started being work. Lily and Mel shifted again into lopsided human children with the ears and tails still poking through, and waded in to soothe the babies with their own small tails. Ember blinked up at me with wet eyes until I picked him up, and something turned over in my chest that I had no cynical word for. I had been thrown out on a rock to die. Now I stood in a warm room full of my children, green and furred and feathered and scaled, and I felt, absurdly, completely, like somebody's father. We went back down to mend the Empire's machine, and the machine had a guardian we had not counted on. It came out of the dark as a giant sorrowful face, bald, bearded, weeping, and I threw a shield up on instinct. Not a chimera. A manticore, Ares said. Far worse than a chimera. A lion's body under a bald old man's face, and a tail that rained needles of raw magic. It cried the entire time it attacked. The needles broke on my shield like light on glass, and when the thing could not punch through, it simply charged headfirst into a wall it could not see, and knocked itself out cold. It flopped onto its back, clutched its own head, and wailed like a lost child. I cannot tame a creature still spoiling for a fight, and I was working out how to end this one kindly when Gus stepped between us. Silent Gus, who never asks for anything, knelt down and clasped his hands and begged me, with just his eyes, already stroking a bald head that looked so much like his own. He fed it a strip of dried fish. The crying stopped. The fight had gone out of it for good. I named it Copper and put it in Gus's care, and the 2 bald souls rode off deeper into the dead city together, like they had been waiting their whole lives to find each other. The control temple was a ruin when we reached it. Doors torn off, floor buried in the shattered mithril of golems that something had killed. Sky bowed low. This was past mending, at least for a slime. Gus could do it. He went quiet and grave over the ruptured pipes, and set to work with mithril and our fire. He had barely started when a golden armored golem lurched out of the dark and threw flame at us. one of the temple's own guardians, gone rogue somehow. Copper flattened it into a wall. Bram bound it fast, and I finished it with the pickaxe. It came apart into stones and stranger metal, and at its center sat a cracked, broken core where a clean one should have been. Something had made this golem stop obeying. I pocketed the broken heart, said nothing, and watched Gus tap his mended pipe, proud of himself. Sky set its small body against the device, and the device woke. Walls I had taken for solid stone slid apart. Behind them stood tanks, rows of them, tiers of them, climbing up into the dark. And in every tank, a sleeper, one of the old Empire's own, poured into a waiting body 10,000 years ago and left for a machine to be mended. I had promised a dead Empress's spirit that I would free her people. The machine had been broken since the day we found it, and I had carried that quietly ever since. The way Sky carried it, only louder. Now the water drained, the tanks opened, and one by one, people who had slept since the sky fell on their world opened their eyes and stood up inside their own skins again. They wept. They held their own hands up in front of their own faces and wept at them, and touched one another's arms to be certain, and some of them just sat down where they stood and shook. Sky went very still beside me. It could never take a body back. It had given that up to become my sky, and it had chosen to stay what it was, but it watched its lost people wake with something a slime should not have been able to feel, and felt it anyway. Not all of them woke. Half the wall stayed dark and quiet. The meteor had taken those long ago, and nothing I owned could give them back. But hundreds came home. Hundreds of the lost got their whole lives handed back to them in a buried room, and for a good long while, not one of us said a single word. It was, I think, the only debt I have ever been truly glad to pay. Back up in the sun, I did one more thing with the broken heart in my pocket. I poured a little of the gold metal over it and gave it a body, a golden man, so it could tell me to my face why it had turned on us. It woke furious, remembering being killed. Then it heard me say plainly that I meant it no fight, and it gave me the truth instead. It had not gone rogue at all. It had broken its own oldest order on purpose. Every golem down there was built to guard the sleepers, but waking the sleepers meant waking something else. And to stop that, this one had chosen to wreck the machine and wear the blame. Walter leaned in close. Elena's hand found my arm. Below the buried city, the golem said, something far older was sleeping. A king of the deep earth. It breathed fire. It hated humankind down to the root, and it stirred a little more every time we bled the heat and the melted rock up out of the ground to feed our forges and our farms. We had been mining its ceiling for months without knowing. It was beginning to wake, and when it woke all the way, it meant to scorch the surface down to bare stone. I stopped feeling like a man who had gotten to keep something. Ring the bell, I told Walter. Bring Roland and the rest up. Seal the deep road, move the slimes and the spiders to the surface, and put a real door on that tunnel. He was already moving. Somewhere across the sea, Layla and Camille were still courting a navy. We could borrow and calling home the houses that hated the kingdom. And somewhere else, the kingdom itself had a fleet under orders to come erase us. I stood in my half-built city, with a crown I never wanted waiting on a table behind me, and understood that the thing stirring under my feet was only one of two shadows leaning in toward my home. Because past the edge of the sea, the other shadow was already sailing. I did not see it that night. I only pieced it together after, but I have pictured it enough times since to tell it to you true. A warship of the kingdom that had thrown me away, cutting the black water toward my island, and two of my brothers at a table in its belly. The younger one could barely sit still for wanting to see me again. He was the kingdom's strongest mage, and its cruelest child both. The sort of boy who once burned a small living thing for the crime of waking him too early, then burned every creature like it in the capital, while our father said only, "Is that so?" He turned a jar of bone powder over and over in his soft hands, and smiled at the dark, and talked about my face and my toys, and how badly he wanted to play with me again. The older one, red-haired, watched him and felt the same cold everyone feels near that boy. He was the kingdom's quiet knife, sent along under a clerk's cover to learn everything my island was, and hiding what he truly was, even from his own brother. He could not work out why our father had paired a spy with a monster and aimed the two of them straight at me. Neither could I. But I had learned young that my father never once sent a gift. They were one day out. The war I had lit, without ever meaning to, had finally put on a human face, and it was coming to my shore wearing my own family's. I had rung the war bell at dawn and sealed the deep road behind a door of Gus's mithril. By the time the tea had gone cold, I had decided to open it again and walk down there myself. The golden envoy laid it out plainly. The thing under the island, the king of the earth's depths, was angry because we had been draining the molten rock it guarded to power the buried machine, and it had promised to burn the surface off the reef if we didn't stop. Sky had already flattened itself over the control device and shut it down. So the threat was paused. It was not gone. If it can talk, I said, then it can be talked to. Somebody dug too deep and took what wasn't his. That somebody was me. Elena put her hand flat on the table, the way she did when she meant to argue and already knew she'd lose. Then let me go in your place, just in case. No. Walter tried next, folding his gray wings small so he looked older than he was. He said a face like his would never be mistaken for a human's, so the king's hatred of men would have nothing to catch on. It was a good argument. I turned it down anyway. The envoy offered to go ahead alone and explain me first. I told it no, and I meant that no harder than the others. On this rock, the dolls and the golems are not tools. They are people who happen to be made of metal, and I do not spend people to save myself a walk. So we kept the party small on purpose. Me, Sky, the golden envoy, and 15, my silver mithril sentry. I sent Fiona down to the buried warehouse for the transfer stones, and while she ran, I stood there with the crown I still hadn't put on, waiting on a table behind me. The transfer stone dropped us into a dark I didn't recognize, and I have known a great many kinds of dark. The envoy led us down branching paths, where the walls held stones that glowed in slow rainbows. Not the brilliant stones I knew, not anything in my encyclopedia. My hand went to the pickaxe on its own. That tool has stopped being a thing I carry and started being a thing I am, and every one of those strange stones was singing the one song I can never quite ignore. I gripped the handle until it hurt, and I kept walking. The envoy said even the old empire had barely known this place. It had been found just before the meteor fell, and after that, there had been no one left to map it. Then the tunnel opened, and I forgot the stones. It was not a cave, it was a country. Light poured down from somewhere in the ceiling like real sun, and under it lay a wide green grassland and a lake so still it looked poured rather than filled. I had come down expecting a furnace and found a morning instead. A voice moved across the water, old and enormous, and not quite bothering to sound like a voice at all. Why, it wanted to know, was there a human here? Past the grassland, the ground fell away into a shore of black rock, and beyond it, a sea of lava rolled slow and red to the horizon. The heat leaned on me like a hand. I couldn't see who was speaking, so I decided that didn't matter and spoke to the whole room. My name is Adrian. I came to meet the king of the depths. I think that's you. The voice allowed that it was. I told it why I'd come, that I was the one who had taken the melted rock it had forbidden, that I knew now that had been wrong, and that I meant to apologize and make it right. The king found that funny. It knew I was human, and it made a point of reminding me that it hated humans, in case nobody had warned me. I said I'd been warned. I'd come anyway, because the digging had been mine, so the apology had to be mine too. That was when it decided it liked me, not as a guest, but as a cure for how bored it was. A shape reared up off the lava, a dragon poured out of fire, and the whole chamber shook, while the king told me what it wanted in payment. It wanted a fight, to the death. It had been waiting tens of thousands of years, it said, for exactly this. I refuse, I said. There's nothing to win in it, but if you hate this place, I can get you out. The fire went very still. Then, almost embarrassed, the largest thing in the room admitted the truth. The avatar wasn't its real body. Its real body was sealed behind a wall it had never once managed to break, from the inside or the out, in all those long thousands of years. I walked over to the wall. The king laughed at me for bringing a mining tool to a god's prison. I set the pickaxe against the stone, and I swung. The wall came apart like wet clay. I knew the moment I touched it what it was made of. Sealing stone, the one rock in the world that is supposed to hold anything forever, and the one rock that answers to a cave king the way ordinary stone answers to me. It didn't crack. It unmade itself, sliding into my inventory a neat block at a time, and where the wall had stood, there was a dragon. He was red from horn to tail, scaled like a shield wall, and he stared at the gap where his cage used to be as if I had reached up and taken down the sky. For a long breath, the fire avatar and the true body both just gaped at me. Then he asked my name and my crest. I told him, Cave King. I've never seen anything that big move that fast. The flame prison demon lord, a creature that had bored a threat straight through a whole empire, shrieked and melted himself back into the lava to hide. Somewhere under the surface, he babbled that he'd meant no harm, that the last cave king had been a monster the demon kings dug their tunnels around just to avoid. "I'm not here to kill you," I said to the bubbling lava. "I only came to let you out. That was my mistake." The instant he understood I wasn't the old terror, that I was some 15-year-old who had inherited the name, his fear turned itself inside out into greed. He rose back up grinning and announced that a freed demon king could hardly do better than a tame cave king for a servant, and that I would do nicely. So I took the ceiling stones back out of my inventory and rebuilt his wall. "Wait," I said, fitting the last block into place. "You raised a weapon at us once already. I don't know what you are yet, so no." The begging started before the wall was even finished. It was not dignified. An ancient god wept and hammered on the far side and swore he was sorry, that he'd been rude, that he couldn't go back in there. "Please, let me out. I'll never. Just don't leave me. I can't do it again. Not one more day of it. Please." Something quiet at the back of my skull asked whether I wanted to tame the creature on the other side of the wall. I said yes. Just like that, the fight went out of him, and I had a name, Eldon, the flame prison demon lord, sworn to a miner, sobbing with relief in the dark. I broke the wall a second time, and this time, nothing behind it was afraid of me. Out in the open, Eldon was smaller than his legend, barely a head taller than I was, for all the doom in his voice. He rolled in the grass like a freed dog and laughed until the chamber rang. "Free," he kept saying. "I'm free. I'm actually free." And then he would start laughing again. When he finally settled, he told me about the cave king who came before me, the one who had handed a ceiling stone to the hero who caged him. He'd hated that man for 1,000 years. He was careful to say he did not hate me. What he wanted, he said, was to go home, back to the Elden continent that still carried his name, and rule it as a demon king once more. I had to tell him what home was now. I'd heard it from Lloyd, the earth dragon merchant who came from there. The continent was a burned-over waste where dragons tore at each other with nobody left to stop them. Eldon went down like his legs had been cut. He pressed his face to the grass and begged me to let him go back, not to conquer now, but to make the killing stop. And he swore every oath a broken king can swear, that he'd be my vassal, that he'd never raise a war for its own sake, that his people would be mine when he found them again. He even flickered into a person to plead at eye level, some tall, red-haired shape, and bounced straight off the shield I keep up around myself without thinking. He landed flat on his back in the grass and kept begging from there. "We'll go," I told him, not blind. "We wait for Lloyd, we learn the land, then we go." He agreed to anything, and when I mentioned we were short of anyone who could teach magic, the last demon king of the flame lit up like a boy and swore there was no finer fire mage under the sky. Back on the surface, I set a dragon down in front of my council and watched everyone try to be polite about it. Eldon bowed like an actor and introduced himself. Elena had just started to say something kind about how long he'd been alone when Roland cut clean across her. "You," he said, leveling a thick green finger. "That true? You tried to make our boss fight you to the death?" Eldon admitted it, all apology now. No killing meant he'd only been bored. He'd only wanted a spar and a servant out of the deal. Roland glared a moment longer, then slid a look at me and grumbled that, well, he could see it. He still remembered how I'd looked the first day we met, holding a pickaxe, like I meant to use it on him. Fiona wanted only one thing, and asked for it outright. Would he teach her the big magic? Eldon puffed up, delighted, and offered to demonstrate on the spot by burning down the world tree. "No, no, no," Fiona yelped, and half the table came out of their chairs. Elena got there first, gentle and immovable, and explained that the tree was ours, that it did not grow anywhere on the continent anymore. Eldon wilted and apologized to the tree personally. Then, to make it up to us, he said he'd show us his best on something no one would miss, the empty sea. We stood on the cliffs and let him aim at the horizon. What left his mouth was almost nothing, a single red bead of light, no bigger than a lantern, drifting out over the water and shrinking as it went. I remember thinking it was a letdown. I went on thinking that right up until it reached the far edge of the sea and the world turned white. The blast stood up off the ocean taller than the island, a wall of fire and cloud that swallowed the whole horizon and hung there. Then the sound arrived, and after the sound, the wind, and after the wind, the sea itself, humped up into a wave coming home to drown us. I threw up a shield without deciding to. Elena's snapped up beside mine, Walter's over both, 3 layers of hard air, and the wave broke across all 3 and fell back hissing. When the spray cleared, the demon lord looked pleased with himself, and I was looking at the place where the sea used to lie flat, thinking that I had just watched a magic that could end an argument between continents. That, I told him, is the last time you demonstrate anything toward my island. He agreed cheerfully. He did not seem to grasp that somewhere out past that white wall, the ocean had just done something to somebody. I only learned the rest of it later, and pieced it together the way you picture a thing you didn't see. There was a warship out there under the golden sun flag, one day from my shore, and Eldon's little red bead had gone off almost on top of it. The wind off the blast tore the sails to rags and snapped the foremast into the sea. When the water finally stopped heaving, the ship could still limp forward, but it would never turn and go home. Marcus, the 11th prince, the quiet knife my father had aimed at me behind a dull clerk's face, stood in the wreckage and understood two things at once: that the island held a power he had been sent to measure, and that a half-drowned ship was the perfect excuse to land. Because I was the kind of fool who would never turn castaways away, and he knew it. He very nearly laughed at how neatly it had all fallen into place. His brother did not laugh. Victor, the pretty, soft-handed one, the strongest mage the kingdom had ever raised, and the cruelest thing it had ever kept, stood at the rail and came apart quietly. He had believed there was no magic in the world he did not already own. The white wall on the horizon had just called him a liar, and he could not carry it. He turned a jar of pale powder over and over in his hands, and muttered that such a thing should not be allowed to exist, while below him, down in the hold, a sealed barrel that none of them had opened knocked softly against its ropes. The lessons started the next morning, and they went about as well as the demonstration had. Eldon's whole method was to shout a word, wave a claw, and tell us to feel it. Fiona complained you couldn't learn a thing from bang and whoosh. He told her magic was practice and pictures and nothing else. So I pictured a small, controlled flame the way I'd been taught in the capital, said the words for his highest spell, and set them together. What I got was not small. It went up black instead of red, a column of dark fire that ate the daylight and turned noon into midnight over the whole field. Eldon and I both had shields up before the ash came down. When the sky handed the sun back, he looked at me for a long moment and told me, serious for once, to never cast his highest magic again, that my knack for fire was so good it frightened him, and that if I ever leaned on it fully, I might crack the world open under our feet. Then Walter, who wears a Demon King crest and cannot help himself, tried the same thing and blacked out the sky a second time. Eldon scolded the pair of us like a tired nurse. He was still scolding when Ember butted up against his leg. The baby fire dragon had smelled a bigger one of his own kind and come to investigate, and Eldon, who had just threatened the planet, went shy and clumsy, holding something smaller than himself. To make peace, he taught us a gentler spell instead. Firebomb, he called it, softened with a picture of flowers. And the evening ended with the whole island throwing sparks of color up over the world tree, while every child on the reef screamed with joy. For a few days, it was almost peace. Eldon watched everyone drill their new fire and marveled at how hard my people worked. At Walter's crest, at Lily's rare blood, and then, going quiet, at Mel. He said he could not name what Mel was. Not a bird, not any beast he had met in all his years, and the not knowing put a dread in him he couldn't explain. I told him she was just a good child. He nodded, but he took a beat too long to do it, and that stayed with me. Then, mid-sentence, he lifted his head toward the sea. I felt it too, a knot of power out on the water, one signature in it far too large. For half a breath, I let myself hope it was Camille sailing home. Gus pushed a telescope into my hands, one of the ones he grinds from Leviathan scale, and I put it to my eye. Black flag, gold edging, a golden sun burning in the middle of it, the homeland, a ship of the line, the best the kingdom's navy owned, and she was a wreck. 3 gashes in her hull, most of her masts gone, riding low and driven at us by a wind mage burning himself hollow at the bow just to keep her moving. The old panic reached up for me, and I put it back down. We had spent a whole story getting ready for this exact sail. I rang the bell, non-combatants into the caves, anyone who could hold a weapon out onto the pier, and every last soul on the island, I said, wears a human face until I say otherwise. No wings, no scales, no fangs, nothing for that deck to see and carry home. Then I told them the thing none of them wanted to hear. I was going out to it myself, alone, in a boat, because a wreck under that flag could be my brother's, or my father's men, or the opening move of the war I had lit without ever meaning to. It was my reckoning to open. I set the crown back down where it had been sitting all this time, unworn, and I climbed into the boat, and I began to row out toward my own family coming to my shore. I took the oars myself. The wreck sat a quarter mile off my harbor, listing hard to one side, and the flag it still flew was the one I had grown up under, a golden sun on a field of deep blue. 3 long gashes opened its hull to the waterline. Most of its masts were gone. I knew what had done that. My own fire lesson had done that. A red bead thrown at empty sea that had come back as a wave taller than the island. The ship of the line that had crossed an ocean to measure me could not even turn around now. Ares rode in the bow, all 8 legs folded neat, the little yellow stone he spoke through tucked under one of them. Fiona sat behind me with her hands loose in her lap, ready, saying nothing. A goblin and a kobold worked a second set of oars. I had thought about hiding them. I had decided against it. If the kingdom wanted to know what I had built, it could look at it straight. Suppress everything, I said. No magic they can read, not yet. Ares dimmed himself down to nothing. I did the same, folded my own power in until a court mage would have called me empty, until I was only a thin young man in salt-stained clothes rowing a boat. Closer, and I could make out the men on the deck. Some were down, some were bleeding. There, Ares tilted one eye toward the hull. Scratches on the planks, my lord, but no arrows in her, no scorch from a ram. Whatever bled those men, it was not a sea battle. I had already seen it. I had also already seen the man standing at the rail, red-haired, waving both arms like we were the happiest surprise of his life. And I knew that face. It belonged to the 11th prince. It belonged to a brother who had lifted a cup and laughed the day they read my name off the map. I brought the boat in under the broken flank and reached for the ladder. I came up onto a deck that lay tilted like a roof. Marcus met me with his arms already open. He was overjoyed, he told me. I was alive, here of all the wretched places in the world, and wasn't that a miracle? He said they had been set on by pirates, the Corvin clan, and beaten half to death, and thank every god it was my shore they had washed up against. I looked past him at his men. They were laid out along the low rail, a dozen of them, and their wounds were clean and deep and wrong. I have seen what a boarding pike does and what a falling spar does. This was neither. These were cuts laid on by something that could open a man exactly as far as it wanted to and no farther. I knelt by the nearest one, put my hands on him, and began to knit him back together. And while I worked, I answered my brother. The Corvin clan aren't pirates anymore, I said. They live on my island. Their captain sews nets on my docks. So it wasn't them. His smile held, barely. He changed his story without a breath in between. Not pirates. He'd misspoken. They had been chasing a fugitive, Layla, my old betrothed, who'd fled the kingdom with her father's people. Layla came here in the spring. I moved to the next man. She stayed 4 days and sailed on. You'd have crossed her wake weeks ago if any of that were true. 2 lies in the time it took to heal 2 men. He went quiet after that. Beside me, Fiona had dropped to her knees over a 3rd sailor, her hands glowing, her jaw set. The man I was holding gripped my sleeve and tried to thank me. He got out that he had a small child at home before his voice failed. I told him to save his strength. I meant it more than he could know, and above all of it, someone was laughing. The other prince sat on an overturned barrel in the shade of the broken mast, blonde, soft-handed, delicate as a painting of a boy, watching me mend his own crew like it was a puppet show put on for his amusement. Victor. He could close every one of these wounds with a wave of his hand. The kingdom had raised him to be the finest mage it ever made, and he had done nothing but watch them bleed. When I said as much, he told me plainly that they were nothing, farm dirt, leave them be, and more would sprout on their own. Sweating over them was beneath a man with his gift. I stopped healing. I stood up. "You're going to help," I said. He asked, smiling, why he would ever do a thing like that. So I let go. I had folded my power down to a whisper to come out here. Now I opened my hand and let all of it back at once. It came up out of me and filled the deck and pressed down on the whole ruined ship like a weight dropped out of the sky. The sea itself went flat and silent around the hull. Every man still standing staggered. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You can use recovery magic," I said. "So use it. You're royalty too, aren't you? Start earning it." His smile came apart. The color drained out of his face. He said the word impossible once and then again, the way a man says it when the one thing he has built his whole life upon has just cracked under his feet. All his days he had told himself there was no magic he did not know. And here was a brother he remembered as empty, holding an ocean still. He shook, he sweated, and Marcus, who had watched the whole thing with his mouth open, found his tongue at last and ordered him, in a voice pitched high and thin, to get up and heal. Victor got up. He healed. He loathed every second of it, and he did it anyway. I let my power ebb back down and went to the next wounded man, as if nothing at all had happened. That was the moment the account turned over. The people who had thrown me away were on their knees on a sinking ship, needing the reject to let them live. Roland bellowed from the pier, and my people brought the ship in. They didn't so much tow it as become the tow line. Orcs on the ropes, a golem shouldering the hull. The whole broken thing walked into dock before it could finish going under. We carried the wounded into one of the long warehouses we had built for trade, and there Elena and Fiona and half a dozen others worked over them until every last sailor would live. Not one of them died on my shore. I saw to that before anything else, because it mattered, and because I wanted the kingdom to hear that it was so. Then I had all of them penned, wounded and whole alike, into the warehouse, guards on every door. Some of Gus's golems wearing borrowed human faces, some of my monsters not troubling to. Walter came to stand beside me, gray-skinned and horned and dry as ever. "We built these walls to keep goods safe from thieves," he said. "Convenient that they hold guests just as well." Marcus came trotting out before I had finished the thought, loose and easy, and clapped me on the shoulder as if we were boys again. "Brothers," he said, "a reunion. Where was the harm in it? Take your hand off our leader." Roland was there in a single step, a thick green finger leveled at my brother's nose. Marcus laughed it off. I said nothing at all, which said enough, and after a moment, his hand slid from my shoulder on its own. I asked him about the ship, not the flag, not the pirates, the wounds. "Clean cuts," I said, "on unarmed men, on a hull with no arrow in it. That was not an explosion." He blamed my explosion anyway, the wave that had cracked his hull, which was true as far as it went and nowhere near far enough. He would not touch the wounds. He asked brightly whether I might repair his ship. "I'll repair your ship," I said. And then, because he plainly believed he had won something, "Now tell me who sent you across an ocean to a rock everyone swore was bare." He deflected. He admitted, when I pressed, that once his sailors reached home, they would talk, that there was no keeping the island a secret now, whatever he did. So I stopped fencing with him and gave him the truth instead, plainly, the way I wanted it carried. "I lead an island where people and monsters live together," I told him. "Our father surely knows it by now. We will not change what we are, but we do not want his war. Carry him that. Tell him I would far rather trade in gold than in blood, and tell him that if he makes me choose, I will fight for this place, and I will not lose it." Then I bowed to him, a full bow, lower than a lord owes an errand boy, because the message weighed more than my pride. He blinked at that. He hedged, and then he agreed. He recovered quickly, though. He asked for a tour of the island. He let his eyes drift to Elena, where she stood wiping her hands, and something in me went cold and level. No, I told him. He would see the inside of that warehouse, and nothing else until his ship could float. One of Gus's golems settled the matter, a squat, bearded thing that took an immediate and terrible liking to my brother, wrapped him up in both arms, and hauled him back through the warehouse door while he yelped for mercy. I let it happen. Walter watched them go. "He'll spy the moment your back is turned." "I know," I said. "Treat them well. Watch them closer." Walter was proven right inside the hour. Ares came to me first with what he had drawn out of the sailors. Gently, he swore, only a little of his poison, only enough to loosen a tongue. It confirmed what my gut had already told me. My brothers had not washed up here by any accident. They had been sent. Their father had aimed them at my island the way a man aims a knife, to measure it, and to learn how a bare rock had grown teeth. I had barely finished hearing it when Hayden came up the path from the mines, dragging a man who, until he crossed the threshold, had not been there at all. Marcus. He had made himself invisible, not only to the eye, but to every sense a mage has. No sound, no scent of magic, a hole in the world where a prince ought to stand. It was a killer's gift, and he wore it well. It had gotten him past my walls and halfway down a mine stair. It had not gotten him past a kobold's nose. "Boss?" Hayden set him down hard, one paw fisted in his collar. "Sorry, beyond here is off limits." Behind him, Ashton stood with a hand on his sword and remarked, "Dry." That human scent was the easiest thing in the world for a kobold to follow. Marcus did not bother to deny it. He had seen enough down there to guess the whole of it. The mine, the iron rails, the great tree, and my old worthless crest at the root of all of it, Cave King. He said it the way a man says the answer to a riddle that has been gnawing at him for years. Then he made me an offer. Send him home safe, he said, and he would feed me the court's secrets, everyone. And when I sailed to take the kingdom, he would open its doors from the inside. He was a knife. He was offering to be my knife. I would be a fool to refuse it, he told me. After everything they had done to me, with dragons and monsters at my back, I could have my revenge before the month was out. I looked at him a long moment. "I'm not going to invade anyone," I said. I do still carry some of it, what all of you did. I won't pretend I don't, but it doesn't weigh much next to the people I have to keep alive. I only want to guard what's mine. He stared at me as though I had spoken in a language he did not own. Then he asked, almost quietly, what I meant to do with him. Nothing, I said. You'll just have company for a while. I gave him over to Hayden and Ashton to watch, and Hayden's whole face lit up. He spun a circle right there in front of his brother, crowing that he had finally gotten his chance to shine, which was when the noise came out of the warehouse, glass breaking, and a moment behind it, on the wind, the sweet smell of apples. I felt Marcus go still beside me. Whatever crossed his face then, it was not a game. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the warehouse, and he told me, low, that I had better go and see. I left my brother with the kobolds and went in alone. Inside, a glass lay shattered across the floor in a spreading pool that smelled of apples. A young man in a magic university robe stood over it, still scolding a middle-aged crewman for the crime of offering his highness a drink brought by filthy monsters. And on his barrel in the corner sat Victor, turning the broken stem of the glass over in his fingers, telling the room in that light, bored voice of his how much he hated the smell of apples, how sweet things gave him a headache, how the noise was starting to grate on him. Then he turned that same flat attention on the robed boy and took him apart. He had always known, he said, that the boy's talent was a fraud, tools and smuggled drugs to fake a gift he had never been born with. He had kept him close all the same. A useless thing could still make a useful tool. Then he told him to be quiet, and he lifted one hand, and the young noble did not survive it. I never saw the spell. There was nothing to see. One moment the boy was bowing, stammering out an apology. The next, he was on the floor and would not rise. Roland was at my shoulder by then, shouting at Victor. What did he think he was doing? Who had given him the right? And I was already across the room and on my knees with my hands out and my recovery magic pouring into a body that would not take it. Nothing answered. It was like pressing warmth into stone. Victor watched me try and told me not to bother. His magic, he said, leaves nothing behind for healing to catch hold of. There is nothing left in there to mend. I stayed kneeling a moment longer than I needed to. I was doing arithmetic I hated. The boy I remembered from court had burned animals for sport. Somewhere in the years since, he had begun burning people, and he had done it just now as easily as a man swats a fly, in front of a full room, on my island, and felt nothing at all. You don't get to do that here, I said. Stop. He only smiled and reminded me, fondly, of the last time I had raised a hand to him, the time I had struck him, years ago, at court. He had never forgotten it. He had been waiting a long while to pay it back in full. And then he reached into his coat and drew out a small glass vial of pale ash, and held it up so the gray light caught it, and I stopped breathing. I knew what it was. I knew it before he spoke, and hearing him name it was still like being opened along an old seam. When I was small, before any of this, there had been a creature, a little gentle thing kept on display in the palace yard for the court to throw stones at. I used to slip out at night and feed it. It was the one living thing in all that cold stone place that was glad to see me, and I loved it the plain, whole way a lonely child loves the one soft thing in his world. One night, Victor caught me at it and smiled and told me I could have it. Then he burned it down to ash in front of me while I screamed. And there was no magic in me then, nothing to stop him and nothing to bring it back. I buried what was left with my own 2 hands and told no one, ever. He had dug up the grave. He had carried the ashes across an ocean. He had done it, he told me happily, only to see the look on my face. And there it was, he said. There was that face. Wasn't it a wonderful thing? For the first time since I had come to this island, I felt my calm slip its leash. Give it back, I said. My voice did not shake, and that was the frightening part. You have no right to it. Give it back. He laughed, and he opened the vial. The pale ash rose out of it, and it did not scatter. It gathered. It thickened and darkened and coiled up into the still air as a rope of black mist, alive somehow, wrong somehow, reaching. And the cold that came off it was not grief, and it was not mine. Whatever my brother had truly carried across the sea, it was not ash, and it was awake now. The ash did not scatter. I had watched 1,000 things fall out of the dark on this island, and every one of them obeyed the plain rules. Stone dropped, smoke rose, ash blew away on the wind. This did not. The pale powder poured out of the little glass vial in my brother's hand, and gathered instead of scattering, darkened instead of fading, and stood up off his palm like a rope pulled tight by something on the other end of it. I did not decide to move. My hand came up, and the word was out of my mouth before the thought behind it had finished. Wind. The gust took Victor off his feet and put him into the warehouse wall. He slid down the boards laughing, and through the blood on his teeth, he told me it was already too late, that the thing in the mist was not a spell, that it was one of the old dead things the kingdom had outlawed, and nothing I owned could put it down. I threw fire at the rope of black anyway. The flame went through it and lit nothing. The cold only deepened. Then the mist found one of his fallen men, where he lay against the crates. I will not walk you through what it did. I only know that where a frightened man had been trying to crawl toward the door, the black closed over him like water over a stone, and when it opened again, he was simply gone, and something else was standing up in his place. It rose until its horned head brushed the rafters. A great humanoid thing, black-furred, a long sorrowing face like a ram's, two ragged wings dragging behind it like burned sails, and the power coming off it. I had stood in front of a demon lord on this island and felt the ground remember his name. This was more. My skin knew it before my mind caught up. Whatever my brother had truly carried across the sea, it had woken all the way now, and it was bigger than anything I had a plan for. Out! I did not shout it. I did not have the breath to. Everyone out! To the cave, now! The sailors were already scrambling for the gaps in the wall. Ashton came through the doorway with his sword half drawn, took one look up at the thing filling the room, and started to say we could hold it. I cut him off with 2 words and the truth in my face, and he stopped arguing. He put his hand to the horn at his belt instead, and a moment later, the evacuation bell was ringing off the tower, hard and steady, carrying across the whole island. Victor got his feet back under him against the wall, and then he told me its name. He said it the way a child holds out a gift he has spent all week wrapping, waiting to watch your face open with it. He said the creature had a name, and I already knew the name because I was the one who had given it years and a lifetime ago to a small, gentle thing that used to eat out of my hand in a palace where nothing else would come near me. Lopez. The word went into me like a nail. My oldest, my first friend, the soft creature my brother had burned to ash in front of a boy who could not stop him. Dug up out of a grave, I dug with my own hands, carried across an ocean, and stood up as this. For one breath, I could not move at all. The monster moved first. It turned, slow, and drove a fist down into Victor and folded him back into the wall a second time. He coughed, and the smile came off his face for the first time all night, and I watched real fear arrive in my brother like a tide. He scrambled up, spitting the one lie that might save him. He pointed at me. He told the creature that I was the one who killed it, that I had let it die, that the boy it used to trust had thrown it away, and the worst of it was that I could not open my mouth to argue because a part of me had always believed it. The great head swung toward me. Behind it, Victor found his footing and his cruelty at the same time and gave the thing an order in a voice gone shrill to remember what it was, to spare nothing, to bring the whole rock down. The wings came up. They came down once, and the roof of the warehouse tore off into the night, walls and beams and all, and the cold sky opened over the both of us. I took the pickaxe off my back. It was the same tool the whole court had laughed at. The worthless crest, the miner's toy, the thing they gave a prince they wanted dead. It had broken a leviathan's throat and a mountain of stone and the seal on a demon lord. Now I held it in front of the last soft thing I had ever loved, and I hated every reason I had to raise it. Victor was not done spending. Off in the dark behind the monster, he turned his forbidden work on the last of his own men. There was a wash of that cold light, and a sound I have no words for, and when it cleared, they were simply gone. And where they had been, 4 lesser horrors, and a rank of skeleton things rose up, armed and waiting. He called them materials. He called the men who had sailed him here materials. That was the moment I stopped thinking of my brother as a man at all. I did not go for Victor. I went for the thing wearing my friend's shape, and I did the only thing left that was not a weapon. I called to it. Lopez. My voice cracked in the middle of the name, and I let it. It's me. It's Adrian. Do you know me? It stared. Nothing moved behind its eyes. No anger, no memory, just a black and patient emptiness. I had read the old stories once, the warnings about the dead brought back wrong, how they come home with the shape and none of the soul. I had not believed how much it would hurt to see it proven. It lifted one hand, and the skeleton things came for me across the rubble. Up on the wall, my people were already moving. Eldon's voice rolled down over the yard. Master, the small ones are mine, every one of them. Keep your eyes on the big one. Fire the color of a forge fell in a sheet across the front rank of horrors and folded them into ash. Elena had the line beside him, calm and quick, throwing up shields over the ones who could not shield themselves, calling down to me that the wall would hold, that I should trust her and finish it. Roland's roar came right behind her, a command to loose everything they had, and the air over the yard filled with iron and light, coming down on the minions in a wall of it. They gave me the one thing I needed. They gave me Lopez alone. I turned back to him, and I stopped pretending I could talk him out of it. I never wanted to find you again like this, I said, low, just for the two of us. He answered with a fist the size of a door. I threw everything I had at him, and he ate it, fire, and he caught it in one bare hand, and closed his fist, and it was gone. Thunder, and he tilted his head and let it break across his shoulder like rain. Ice, I sent in a spear for his chest, and he took it out of the air the way you would pluck a fly. He fired the black mist back at me, and it burst against my shield hard enough to drive my boots a hand's width back through the gravel. Then he was simply there, closing the whole distance in a stride, and his fist came through my shield as if it were a soap film and put me across the yard on my back. I got up. That was the whole trick of my life. I got up. I have been getting up off floors people made for me since I was a boy. I dug into my inventory and threw everything solid I owned. Rock, raw iron, a fist of orichalcum worth more than most kingdoms. I hurled them at him like a landslide, and they bounced off his hide and rang away into the dark without leaving a mark. Magic slid off him. Metal slid off him. There was nothing in my whole arsenal that touched him, except one thing. He kept everything in front of him. Every blow, every catch, every guard faced me square. Nothing guarded his back, so I stopped fighting the front of him. Months ago, on a whim, I had seeded the ground of this island with paired transfer stones, the kind you scatter so you can be two places at once. I had one still on me, its twin buried in the rubble at the far edge of the yard. When he charged again, all his weight and hate coming straight down the middle at me, I did not brace, and I did not run. I stepped sideways out of the world. I came out of the dark behind him with the pickaxe already coming down. I did not swing it to kill him. I want that understood, because I understood it even then, with grief sitting on my chest like a stone. I swung it to break the thing that was holding him, to find the seam in my brother's foul work, and split it, the way I had split every wall this island ever put in front of me. The point of the Cave King's worthless tool came down between those ragged wings and bit, and the whole great body pitched forward off its feet and went down into the rubble with a sound like a tower falling. I did not stop. I stepped through the stones again and again, behind him each time, striking the same seam, wearing the hold down blow by blow until the black light in him guttered low and the monster sank and stayed down. Then I threw a shield over him, a dome of it, sealed to the ground, so he could not rise and could not cast, and could not be finished by anyone while I decided what he was allowed to become. Victor was still on the ground where his own weapon had thrown him. The mist was reaching for him too now, the loyal horror turning on the hand that woke it. I could have let it. God help me. I stood there one whole heartbeat and let myself want to. Then I put a second shield between my brother and the thing he made, and I pulled him out from under it. The prince who came across an ocean to break me, saved from his own cruelty by the reject he threw away. I did not do it for him. I did it because I had decided a long time ago who I was going to be, and it was not him. The wall had won. My people came down off it through the smoke. Elena first, then Roland, then Eldon folding his wings in behind them, and told me the small horrors were finished, the last of them scattered and put down. Not one of ours had fallen. On this rock, that is the only victory I have ever cared about. Walter came across the rubble with his hand already raised. A single word from him and Victor dropped flat and did not get up. Ashton and Hayden were on him before he stopped moving, hauling his arms back, binding him, working a gag into his mouth to stop the spells before they started. Ashton looked down at the bound prince and said he could not believe a thing like this was meant to stand above other people. Hayden, tying the last knot, said something dry about how he and Ashton were brothers too, and it had never once looked like this. I told Victor to his face that I hated him, not for what he had done to me. I could carry that. I had carried it my whole life. But for making me raise a hand to the one thing I ever loved, twice over, just to watch my face while I did it. He could not answer around the gag. For once in his life, my brother had nothing to say, and no way to say it. Roland put a heavy green hand on my shoulder and asked, quiet for him, whether I wanted him to finish the creature under the shield. He had seen the hesitation in me before I knew it was on my face. Elena said, gentle, that she could hold Lopez at a distance, so I never had to get close again. I told them no, not yet. Then Eldon crouched by the dome of my shield and studied what lay under it, and told me the thing was of a rare and terrible old race, and that there was a way to bring it back. He could send it down to the demon world and return it to its true shape, whole, itself again. But the way had a price. It cost a life. Roland did not even pause. He put his boot next to my bound brother and said there was a perfect one right there, and the whole crew behind him growled agreement. The sailors Victor had spent like coins. The men he had called materials, all of them wanting the same thing. For one long moment, nobody argued. Nobody had to. It would have been so easy. It would have been, some of them would have said, only fair. Elena was the one who spoke the caution. She said, careful, that taking a prince's life would put Adrian's father on a war footing for certain, that the kingdom would never let it go. And I stood there with the shape of my oldest friend under my shield and my worst enemy under my boot. And I felt exactly how much I wanted to say yes. No. I let the words sit in the cold until they all looked at me. We are not paying for him with a life, not with the lives he already spent, and not with his. I did not build all of this out of a graveyard to turn it into one. I looked down at Victor and I kept my voice flat, the way I keep it for the things that would break me if I let them run. I have spent 17 years refusing to become the people who threw me away. I am not going to hand that back to him tonight. It was Eldon who found the other road. He leaned close over my brother and said there was something on him worth far more than his life, that the sage crest burning its cold geometry on his chest was, to the demon world, a richer offering by far. Use that, he said, and we would even be owed change. Ashton bared Victor's chest. Eldon set his hand over the crest and began. My brother understood a heartbeat too late. He worked the gag loose and screamed his great spells into the night. Flame, storm, thunder. The words that had made him the kingdom's terror since he was a boy. And for the first time in his gilded life, nothing came. Nothing at all. I watched the crest lift off his skin and hang in the air, its light thinning and dim, and go out and break apart into nothing. And with it went everything Victor had ever been. No crest, no power, no throne. A crestless man cannot be king. The sadist who sailed here to prove he was the true heir had just been made the one thing worse than a reject. He had been made ordinary. He screamed that he was the king of Soulfire, over and over, the words climbing and cracking. Not one person in that yard turned to look at him. I found Marcus in the crowd, still bound himself, still watching everything with that careful thief's stillness of his. And I asked him for the one thing I needed from a brother tonight. I asked him to carry the whole truth of what Victor was back to the kingdom. Every crime, all of it. He held my eyes a moment, and then he agreed, low, and I understood he had his own long account with Victor to settle, and would enjoy the settling. Ares could loosen a confession out of anyone. The rest would take care of itself. Under my shield, the darkness began to gather around Lopez, quiet and deep. The first slow work of bringing him home. I stood over it and let myself believe, for the first time since the vial opened, that I might not lose him twice. It was not finished. My father had not come. The war his sons had sailed here to start was still standing open on the water, and everything the kingdom owed the son it discarded was still unpaid. Victor was undone, powerless, bound, ordinary. But undone is not the same as answered, and the man I truly needed to face had not yet set foot on my shore. The tool they laughed at had broken the last thing in my way. What waited past it was not a monster. It was my family. The darkness gathered around the shape under my shield, and I made myself watch it happen. Eldon had told me to hold still and let him work, so I stood in the wrecked yard with the pickaxe hanging from one hand, and did not move while the black closed slow over the fallen monster. I had brought it down without ending it. I had spent the whole night refusing to be the one who put it in the ground. Now I would find out whether any of that had been worth what it cost. The dark drew back the way a tide goes out. It left something small on the stones. A lamb, not the horned horror that had torn the roof off a warehouse. A small, soft, living thing with dark eyes, blinking up at a sky it had not seen in years. The shape I had loved when I was a boy with no one else to love. The shape Victor had burned to ash and carried across the sea in a jar to break me. I do not remember crossing the yard. I remember going down on my knees on the broken stone and gathering it up against my chest. And I remember the sound that came out of me, which was not a word. "It's you," I finally got out. "It's really you. I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you. And I am so sorry." For a moment, it went stiff and confused in my arms. An animal waking in a stranger's grip. Then it seemed to know me. It pushed its head up under my chin the way it always had, and it nuzzled my cheek as if it were the one comforting me, and something I had held clenched for 17 years came loose all at once. Behind me, the yard had gone quiet. My people had stopped where they stood, goblins and kobolds and orcs, sweat-soaked and bleeding from a night's fighting. And they watched a grown man weep over a lamb, and not one of them looked away or made it small. "He is whole again, master." Eldon's voice rolled down low and careful, for once with none of his grandness in it. "What was taken has been given back. The rest is yours to keep." I held on a little longer than a king is supposed to. Then I stood, with the lamb tucked in the crook of my arm, and I let the morning start to come. The peace lasted about as long as it took Victor to work the gag loose. He was screaming before I turned around, shrill, cracked, a man who could not understand why the world had stopped obeying him. I did not need the words to know their shape. He wanted his crest back. He said I had traded his power to buy the life of an animal, and he shrieked it like it was the great crime of the night, that a prince of soulfire had been robbed to raise a lamb. Eldon answered him without heat. "No one here wants your mark, boy," he said, folding his wings. "Your life was spared. Try being grateful for it." Victor did not want gratitude. He wanted the only thing he had ever wanted, to be the most important person in any room, and he ranted about thrones and continents, and the king he was born to be, to a yard that had already stopped listening. That was when the hooded man walked in. He came up from the ruined ship, unhurried, and my goblin captain shouted at him to stop and then simply could not. The words died in his throat. He stood there shaking, unable to move his own feet, and the hooded man walked past him like he was a fence post and said, mildly, that he had only come to speak with his child. I knew the voice before he put back the hood. Every exiled, unwanted year of my life knew that voice. My father, King Louis, undefeated in every war he had ever fought, standing on the skeleton reef he had thrown me onto to die. Elena went still and lowered her head. Even Eldon, who had slept 10,000 years under the earth, drew back half a step and muttered that he had felt something dangerous on that ship the whole time, and now he knew what it was. Victor forgot his crest the instant he saw the crown. He dragged himself across the stone to our father's feet and begged, the word is ugly, and it is the right one, begged him to give it back, to make him a prince again. My father looked down at him the way you look at a tool that has snapped in your hand. He told him, without cruelty and without warmth, that a man with no power was no use to a kingdom, that Victor would live out his days quiet and forgotten in the palace, and that this was all he had left. I have never seen a person come apart the way Victor did at those words. Whatever was still holding him together let go, and he made one last desperate gamble, a final forbidden change dragged up out of some place he should never have touched. It did not work, not against my father. I will not pretend I saw how it was done, because there was nothing to see, no spell, no light, no motion. My father simply refused to be touched, and the thing my brother had tried to become was undone against that refusal. And when it was over, Victor was down in the rubble, broken, ruined by his own last swing. No threat to anyone ever again. Eldon looked at me. He asked, quiet, whether I wanted the boy kept alive. There were questions the capital would want answered, crimes that needed a living mouth to confess them. I nodded. The darkness took Victor gently this time and folded him away into Eldon's keeping, still breathing, which was more mercy than he had ever shown a living thing. Then my father turned to me, and he named me his heir. Not a prince, not the 17th of a long line. The one and only successor to the throne of Soulfire, the whole of it, spoken like an oracle, like a thing already settled. Come home, he said. Take what is yours. For a moment, I could not do anything but look at him. Then I said no. No, I said again. So there was no mistaking it. My people are here. My home is here. I built it on the rock you left me to die on, and I am not going to walk away from it to stand behind you. I have a duty, and it is not to your throne. He told me, flatly, the way he said everything, that he had chosen me because I held more power than any of his children. My magic, my island, the plain arithmetic of strength. To him that was reason enough, and love had never had anything to do with it, and it never would. Roland heard enough. You cast him off, he snarled, already moving. And now that he's built something, you crawl back to collect it? Like hell. He went at my father with everything a general has. He never landed the blow. My father only looked at him, and Roland stopped as if he had hit a wall, every muscle locked, driven down by a pressure I could not see and could not shield away. I threw a barrier over him anyway. It did not matter. My father moved once, one blow, almost lazy, his torn robe falling open on a body far younger than his beard, and Roland went off his feet and across the yard. Bram's kin dropped from the wall and threw silk. Ashton and Hayden rushed in with binding cord. All of it tore away like wet paper against that same invisible weight. I stood in the middle of it, pouring everything I had into shields that buckled the instant they formed. And for the first time since the ceremony, I understood exactly how far above me my father still stood. My hand crept toward a transfer stone, already doing the math on getting my people out alive. And then Elena stepped in front of him. She did not bow this time. She did not flinch, and she did not fall. And I watched the pressure that had flattened an orc general break around her like water around a stone. She looked up at the most powerful man alive and told him, gently, with not one tremor in her voice, that we needed Adrian, that he could not have him, that she would not move. I will not, she said, when he did not answer. Not for anything, not for you. My father went quiet. He studied her for a long moment. Not the way a king studies a threat, but the way a man studies a puzzle whose pieces will not fit. He said, half to himself, that her crest was not what it seemed to be. Whatever he saw in her gave even him pause. The yard held its breath. The undefeated king had met something he could not simply push aside. The sun came up over the water while my father decided what I was. He let the pressure go. All at once the yard could breathe again, my people staggering up off the ground, the weight that had held us all down simply lifting away. He said he would not force me. He said it plainly as a fact he had tested and found true, that a son who could not be commanded, defeated, or bought was not a son who could be dragged home, and he was too old and too honest to pretend otherwise. He would name another heir, Marcus, most likely. It did not seem to cost him a thing to say, and then he said the words I had waited 17 years to hear, and he said them so coldly, I nearly missed how large they were. He looked at the walls I had raised out of a graveyard. He looked at the goblins and kobolds and orcs and monsters standing at my back, at the mine, at the tree, at the whole nation growing on a rock where nothing was meant to live. And he told me that what I had built was mine, that I was not his vassal and not his subject and not his exile, that I was a sovereign, the founder of my own realm, and that from this morning he would deal with me as an equal, king to king, crown to crown, and never again as a father speaks to a discarded son. For the length of one breath, I let myself see it from where he stood. Here was a man who had weighed his 17th child and found him worth less than a barren reef, who had dressed a death sentence up as a divine oracle and gone back to his throne without once looking behind him. And here, that same child stood on that same dead rock, alive, with a demon lord at his shoulder and a woman at his side who could not be moved, and a whole people who would fight a king for him. Somewhere behind the crown and the beard and the terrible calm, the man understood exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly what it had cost him to have been so wrong, and he would never once say so aloud. That silence was as close to an apology as I was ever going to get from him. It was, I found, enough. Then something old and raw came up my throat before I could stop it. Why not just this? I asked him. Why not be my father? Why does it always have to be power and thrones and tests? Why couldn't we ever just be family? He was quiet a moment. He told me, not unkindly, that a king is always alone, and that the more a man takes onto his shoulders, the deeper that loneliness runs, and that I would learn it the same way he had. It was not the answer I wanted. It was, I think, the only true thing he knew how to hand me. He did not embrace me. He did not say he was sorry or proud or any of the words I had made up for him when I was small. He turned toward the water and told me to treat with Marcus for whatever came next, 2 rulers settling their borders. And that was all. But I stood on the shore he had left me to die on, and the man who had once called me worthless called me his equal, and the wound I had carried since I was a boy, the certainty that I was never wanted, only disposable, closed over quietly in the morning light, in front of everyone I loved. I was wanted. I had built a place full of people who wanted me, and now even he had to say it out loud. And the strangest part, the part I had not seen coming, was that I no longer needed the crown he offered in order to believe it. Marcus, to his credit, did not waste a second. My father had barely turned his back before my 11th brother was calling out that we should be allies, forever, his face still twitching from everything he had just watched happen. We sat down in the corner of the warehouse and made it real. I had Walter keep watch on my father down at the ship, and Sky ran the reports up to us, flattening himself into little shapes to show me the old man was doing nothing worse than walking circles around his own hull and hammering at something. Marcus signed the non-aggression pact without a single condition, fast, like a man relieved to be handed a rope. The trade agreement took longer. His kingdom forbids monsters from setting foot in its cities, so we agreed that only my people who could wear human shapes would walk their streets, and that any visitor to Bonareef would keep to the open districts, obey our laws, and stay clear of the caves. Neither of us pretended it was perfect. Both of us understood it was peace, and that peace was the whole point. We spoke of Victor last. I told Marcus I wanted him to carry the truth home. All of it, every name, every life my brother had taken, confessed in full. Marcus agreed. He had his own long grudge against Victor, and a strategist's poison that could draw a confession out of a stone. He would take the boy back across the sea, send the investigators' reports by merchant ship over the next couple of months, and keep our brother's royal blood hidden, so the crown would not have to swallow the shame of what it had raised. It was not a warm conversation. It was two sons of the same cold house finding out, late, that they could stand each other after all. I went down to the dock that afternoon and found the ship already whole. That should not have been possible. The mast had snapped in the fighting, and Ashton met me at the pier looking a little pale and told me my father had carried the new one up and set it in place alone, a whole mast, like a man carrying a broom. I decided, watching him do it, Ashton said dryly, that trying to fight him had been a poor idea. Gus was there too, because of course he was. He had spent the morning at his forge and produced with enormous pride a figurehead for the royal ship, a gleaming metal bust of himself, beard and all, wearing an expression of tremendous self-importance. The crew had plainly been hoping for something more heroic. Gus did not care in the slightest, and my father, to everyone's quiet horror, cooled the metal with a flick of wind, lifted the ridiculous thing one-handed, and fixed it to the prow, saying it would make a fine memento of the island. Nobody argued. Nobody on that dock was ever going to argue with him again. Then I asked him why. Why show all of it, the presence, the strength, the effortless ending of Victor, in front of everyone? And why, back in the yard, he had spoken of a prophecy. So he told me. There was an old prophecy, he said, older than the priests who no longer believed it. The world was ending, not in a war, not in a hard season, ending, truly, and soon. The monsters crossing the sea in greater numbers were only the first thin edge of it. And in all that ruin, the prophecy named a single place as a sanctuary, one rock that survived when the rest went under, Bonareef, the island of the Cave King. He had tried to make me his heir, he admitted, and failed. And the failing only proved the old words true. I was never meant for his throne. I was meant for this. I thought about Sky and the drowned empire sleeping under my feet, and the meteor that ancient world had died to, and the sky over my island going black with things that should have lived an ocean away, and the prophecy stopped sounding like a story. I said we should warn the world, gather everyone, prepare together, face it as one. He nearly smiled at that. He said no one would believe it, that they would have to see it with their own eyes before they knew, and that this was my burden now, not his. Then he told me to lead the way I saw fit, and went to sleep in a warehouse like any other man off the sea. That evening, Elena walked with me to see Victor. He was curled in the far corner where Eldon guarded him, broken and small, hiding his face. And when he heard us come, he told us not to look at him, that he would not speak, that there was nothing left of him worth the seeing. I did not argue the point. I only told him what I had told Marcus, that when he reached the mainland, he should confess everything, honestly, all of it. And then I offered him the thing I am still not certain I should have offered. I told him that if he ever truly meant to atone, if he confessed and paid what the law asked, and the day ever came that he walked free, he could come here, to Bonareef, that we would take him in. That is what this place is, I said. That is the whole of what we are. Even you get a door. He laughed at me. It was a terrible sound, wet and disbelieving, and he asked what I could possibly gain by welcoming him, and then answered himself, nothing. He said he could never come back here, that this was not a place where someone like him belonged, and for once in his life, I think he was telling the plain truth as he saw it. I let it go. Some hands you can only hold out. You cannot make anyone take them. We left him there, but the lamb did not come with us. It hopped down from Elena's arms and crossed the floor to the corner where my brother lay hiding, the small living thing he had burned to ash for the crime of being loved. And it climbed up and rested its head against him, gentle, forgiving a debt no one had asked it to forgive. I heard Victor's breath break. I heard him tell it he was sorry. The lamb of all the souls he had wronged, the one he had wronged first. What came after belongs to an epilogue, and I will tell it plainly, because he chose it plainly. Victor went back across the sea. He asked for the trial himself. He stood in front of the families of the people he had killed, and he did not hide, and he did not run, and he did not once reach for a mercy he had decided he did not deserve. He confessed all of it, and he answered for all of it. And in the end, he did not come home. His name stayed hidden. His crimes did not. Eldon told him, in that old grand way of his, that even past the end he would not be alone, that a soul once claimed is kept. I do not know if that was a comfort. I hope for him that it was. They left the next morning. Elena tried to get them to stay a while longer, the way you do. Marcus would not meet her eyes as he declined, and it took me a second to understand why. He was scanning the crowd for one particular face. At the feast the night before, one of Gus's kin, a bearded little smith woman named Greta, who was Gus's own image down to the whiskers, had decided that Marcus was the love of her life, and my brother, the master assassin, had spent the whole evening fleeing an affectionate smith he could not shake off. My father boarded like a man in a hurry, and I understood that too now. The prophecy was pulling at him, the need to get home and make ready. Before he went up the plank, he told me that if his people ever needed shelter, he would remember that I had offered it, and that he would send an ambassador. I should choose someone, he said, who understood what the island truly was. Elena stopped him with one last question, something she had asked him the day before about her own father, some old obstacle she had never spoken to me about. He tested her the way he tested everyone, asking what she would do if he set himself against her, and she told him, steady as ever, that it would change nothing. He grunted that there was no sense worrying over a person who could not be moved, muttered something about hoping to live to see a grandchild, and told Marcus he ought to take Greta home with him. Greta took that as her cue. She kissed Marcus full on the face. Marcus fled up the plank and into the cabin, and Gus hauled his heartbroken kinswoman back onto the pier by the collar, and the whole dock laughed. The kobolds, the orcs, even me. Then the lines came off, and the great ship turned, and my father and my brother went out across the water and down past the edge of the world. And the war that had hung over my island for a whole season went with them. Not won, not fought, just gone, settled between equals. Elena stood beside me, watching the sail shrink to nothing. You wanted peace, she said quietly. I think it reached them, both of them. Walter found me still on the dock and said the thing advisors are for saying, that if the prophecy kept coming true, the kingdom's kindness might not hold, that a father's respect is a thin wall against a hungry world. He was right, he usually is. I told him we would be ready, because here is the thing I understood, standing on that shore in the clean morning light. I had come to this rock a boy nobody wanted, handed a cave full of other people's bones, and told to die quietly inside it. I had laid those dead to rest with honor, and I had built a living land on top of them, and now the reef of skeletons was a nation, and the nation was a sanctuary, and the worthless crest they had laughed me out of a kingdom for was the one thing the whole world would not be able to do without. The lamb butted my knee. Sky quivered a happy shape around my ankles. Somewhere up the slope, Elena was calling that breakfast was ready, and half the found family I had pulled out of the sea were already arguing over the fish. If only Bonareef survived what was coming, then Bonareef would simply have to be big enough for everyone I could reach in time. If I dug far enough and deep enough and long enough, maybe I could carve out a refuge wide enough to hold not just my island, but anyone the ending tried to take. So I did the only thing that had ever calmed me down, the thing that had turned a death sentence into a home. I picked up the pickaxe, the worthless tool, the cave king's toy, the thing that had broken a leviathan and a mountain, and the seal on a demon lord. I walked down into the dark, and I started to dig. I was wanted now. I had a whole world to get ready for, and for the first time in my life, I could not wait to begin.